Every person or every other person can certainly tell us, "Sorry guys, I know what love is, I've been married 5 times."
Two demons make a deal. Two consciousnesses make a deal. And don't 50 to 80% of divorces prove that we act this way and not otherwise?
Suicide is a consequence of those relationships in the family.
Let's be honest with ourselves. Haven't you ever thought of killing your parents? And those of you who have children, haven't you ever thought of killing your children?
It already came to a thought and beginning of planning an extended suicide.
And our task today is to pull this puppeteer out into the light, the one who manipulates families, society, and every person, and to cut the strings of manipulation. Greetings to everyone. I am sincerely pleased to see all of the participants who have joined us today online, and all those who have come to our studio to begin our fifth game. I will tell you right away that in our games we raised completely different topics. At first we outlined, let's say, a general scope of where we would play and where we would apply our hypothesis. Yet the topic of our today's game, in my opinion, is highly relevant to every single person and concerns absolutely everyone. Any one of those who watched our previous games could say, "This has nothing to do with me. Nothing like that happened to me or to my relatives. It is not interesting to me." But today we are going to talk about relationships between people. Today we will be talking about what is happening in families. And the most important point is under whose directive it is taking place. When people hear the topic of relationships these days, they get excited. So to say, everybody loves to gossip, everybody loves to spread rumors, to complain, and everybody loves to be pitied. And a lot of people are seeking professional help nowadays. I believe you will back this up with the cases you have dealt with. The topic of human relationships is of high relevance, but we will be talking about it and look at it only from that perspective, from that angle, which has been well hidden until today. It has been hidden by people themselves. It has been hidden by specialists whom these people turn to. So, today, we are going to find out the following. Who benefits from hiding what is going on in families? And who manipulates those people, forming the kind of relationships which we can see in our society today? We will be providing examples and analyzing them, and we will be doing it all solely from the perspective of our hypothesis. Our hypothesis is based on the knowledge given in the books by Anastasia Novych and in the programs with the participation of Igor Mikhailovich Danilov. And now, I'm happy to give the floor to our experts, so that we proceed to those difficult cases, which they have to deal with in their practice. The floor is yours.
I'd like to begin today's conversation with two stories. A young man, 18 years old, was admitted to a hospital with a suicide attempt and overdose of sleeping pills. I spoke to him 2 weeks after he had been in the hospital. When he walked into the office, there was something in him which I paid attention to, as if an inanimate person entered. A frozen mask of coldness and detachment was on his face. No emotions, no living response. When we started talking, I felt an incredible tension. He painfully clenched his hands and squeezed his fingers up tightly, and I felt like he was afraid of saying something he couldn't tell, as if he was trying to control himself not to say anything unnecessary. I asked him to tell me what had happened to him, why he had ended up in the hospital. When he began to talk about it, the person was admitted with a suicide attempt, which means something might have been bothering him quite badly prior to that. Usually, people slightly reconsider their lives 2 weeks after coming out of the state. But he simply was enumerating facts in the same cold, indifferent, detached manner, constantly repeating, "I don't care, nothing makes sense, neither my life nor myself." I asked, "Is there anyone in your life, any close person you have good feelings for and would care about?" He reflected for a moment. "No, there is no such person." I asked, "And what about your parents, mom, dad? Did you think how they would feel about what had happened to you?" The following answer was similarly indifferent. "I don't care because I won't be here afterwards." And whatever we talked about, relationships with peers, teachers, his girlfriend, whom he had broken up with, his parents, former friends, all comments were given from the position of such superiority, arrogance, and contempt for people. But when I asked him to tell, "What's good about you? Tell me, what do you like about yourself?" he replied, "There is nothing good about me. I'm just a goner." I said, "Well, this cannot be true. There is something good in every person." He reflected for a moment and responded just as indifferently. "Well, perhaps I can help with what I'm good at, if I make such a decision." And this incredible inner coldness and fierceness terribly impressed not only myself, but also my colleagues who had been talking to him before. At some point, after another question, I asked him, "Well, okay, have you thought about what happened to you? Could you tell me what happened?" He simply listed that he was dating a girl, they broke up, he was upset, he had a sleep disorder, was lethargic and indifferent to everything. But that was obviously not the trigger. And then I asked to clarify, "Have you ever been in similar state before?" He said, "Yes. A year ago, when I got acquainted with a girl for the first time, but it was another girl. I dated her a couple of times, got disappointed, and made a decision to break up with her." I asked, "Was she stressed out about that?" He replied, "I don't know, that wasn't interesting to me, it was me who made a decision." Then an unexpected comment followed. "This past year, I have been going through incredible pain." I said, "Why did you feel pain? After all, you didn't care." "I don't know. I was scared of myself back then." For a year, he was experiencing a terrible pain and unwillingness to communicate with people. For the first time, suicidal thoughts began to appear, and these thoughts were persistently repeating that you are a total loser, you are nothing, and it makes no sense for you to live at all. Yet, he said, from time to time I had such states which, for the first time, frightened my mother. He had suddenly burst into sobs or started screaming. He said, "Through this scream, I released the terrible tension I had inside. After that, I felt better for a while, and these thoughts retreated." Then, a year later, he met another girl. He liked her very much, they were dating. But all this was told in the same indifferent, sort of cold and detached manner. I asked him, "Well, when you feel better and return home, what would you like to do?" "I would work with computers. Computers are reliable, they don't betray like people. I'm very interested in artificial intelligence. That's what I'd like to work on. But I'm disturbed by my constant..." That's how he described his state. The only thing that bothered him, he was constantly experiencing a lack of physical strength, apathy, inability to do anything, and to focus attention. I asked to clarify, "How have you been sleeping all this time?" He had a sleep disorder, therefore he was periodically prescribed sleeping pills. He said, "I could stay awake for several nights in succession." That's the situation. We had a talk, but he was obviously reluctant to speak openly. He said, "No matter how many times I talk about my story and about my state, I'm only getting worse, and everyone begins to consider me insane." I realized that behind this there was his unwillingness to go deeper and say something more. However, at some point he offered me, "You can read my diary notes to understand better what was happening to me." He pulled out his phone, scrolled through several pages, and offered me one of the notes to review. When I started reading his diary notes, I was immediately surprised at how more fully and comprehensively he presented information in those notes. I asked his permission to familiarize myself with the notes, and he agreed. I'd like to read out a few of his notes because they more accurately describe what was happening to him, and this is worth hearing.
Of course, this will be useful for everyone.
Yes, because not every patient keeps such diaries and makes such records. I'm very dispirited, seemingly for no reason, and it looks like depression. I have a terrible apathy, I'm always exhausted, I don't want anything, and nothing makes me happy. I'm very uncomfortable, terribly uncomfortable in my legs, in my head, my whole body is being twisted. It's the third day in a row, in the evening, I have been terribly exhausted, tired out. I want to sleep, but I cannot. Why should I leave? All this is meaningless. If I kill myself, nothing will change. I will cease to exist and won't feel anything. I don't belong to this world anyway. If all human emotions are removed, there is no difference whether something exists or not. I do nothing and I'm permanently exhausted, and this is very strange. So, as he describes, most of the time he's just lying in bed. He's in bed, he has no strength to get up and do anything. If he tries to get up, he feels such a weakness that he lies down again. I think about suicide more and more. I just don't want to leave here. I'm a useless piece of... I just exist. I do absolutely nothing. I'm sick of myself, of the situation with the suicide. It's making me stressed out. I fail in everything related to people. I think I shall kill myself. It will be easier this way. I have started crying. I haven't had such a nervous breakdown for a long time. Tomorrow it will be easier. And the next note, the breakdown is over, but the desire to commit suicide remains. There was no such thing before. I really want to do it, and I think that it's the best thing to do. And this thought is broadcasted constantly day by day. 4 days have passed like a month. Tomorrow I'll be taken to a doctor. I hope they will prescribe a treatment and help me. I'm ready to do this. I don't know what to do to stop it. The real me doesn't help me anymore. I cannot sleep. Father came and messed everything up. It's the only person who can spoil the mood by showing up. Here, let me clarify this moment. When I asked him about his parents, nothing changed in his attitude. No emotional vividness, nothing added up. He just said, I don't get along with my dad. I asked, and what about mom? He said, well, at least she doesn't annoy me. A little after I met with his mother, I will tell you about it later. I feel worse again. I feel pain. I don't know what kind of pain this is. Again, I think it will be easier to kill myself. A little later, I got better. After a while, I felt completely healthy, and that scares me. If I hadn't taken notes, I would have thought I was crazy. That is, such mood swings are endlessly alternating in him. Apparently, the reason is in isolation. I cannot make acquaintances. I don't have an initiative and I'm scared. Apparently, the reason is somewhere in the family. I'm exhausted. It's hard for me to breathe. While undergoing treatment, after he started taking antidepressants, tranquilizers, and sleeping pills, he wrote the following note. I'm thinking, what will I do when I leave the hospital? I believe it's better for me not to leave. I have no desire to leave. This was when he was taking medications. I'm too weak to kill myself. I need to get into a proper emotional state to be strong enough to commit it. Here's also a very interesting point. If we analyze the notes in his diary, we will see that his states are fluctuating. Such states of apathy, emptiness, indifference, and inactivity changed into a sort of resurgence of vitality. And when he has a lot of such notes. I'm too weak, I have no strength to do it, while I'm overwhelmed with thoughts that I must do it. And then he is kind of pushed. Some force makes him sit by the computer. Such a tip is being given. Have a sit and play, or watch a horror movie, a cruel one, with violent scenes. Then emotions emerge in him, he comes to life a little, but then he feels that he is still not strong enough.
Based on this, I again have a question on this particular case. When you have been telling this, Diana, you say that I'm actually interested. What did he emphasize? Did he emphasize that he had broken up with his girlfriend? That there might have been some problems with his parents? Was he so detached from that?
He just didn't believe in that himself.
The emphasis was on the external, because, as far as I know, modern psychology and psychiatry are trying to find some bright external act in order to justify high stress and all the rest.
I'll come down to this and comment when we finish listening to both stories. They are very similar, although at first glance they seem different. Yes, indeed, a search is always directed to the external. There is some reason which has provoked that. I'd like to read out one more little episode. I asked him a question. Tell me, who do you feel you are? Who are you? He took a piece of paper, divided it into 4 squares. I have 4 selves in me. I have classified it this way. And in the diary, there is a note with characteristics of these selves. The first me is a monster. His characteristics: he thinks only of himself and of his own pleasure. He is ready to torture and to murder. He is a manipulator. He is sophisticated into how to hurt a person for the sake of pleasure. He likes people screaming in pain. So far, I haven't been 100% monster. The monster manifests himself in percentage and affects only my desire. I'm doing things consciously so far, but I want to do a lot of things because of him. Under the influence of alcohol, the monster manifests himself much stronger. This is what we were talking about in the previous program. The entry point. The person consumes alcohol, secondary consciousness becomes active, and this is what we call the entry point for influence of third forces. To put it simply and honestly, these are any evil spirits and any program where destruction of a person or any manipulation for destruction of other people is embedded. It's destruction of oneself or other people. The next me is an angel, an altruist with great empathy who wants to help other people. Description is reserved, but the point is clear. The opposite of me, he manifests himself as soon as I have an opportunity to get closer with someone. He insists on breaking up with the person. He wants me to stop communicating with them. He says that I feel good alone and I don't need anyone. And all of them can't actually stand me. This is one of the main reasons of my loneliness. The real me. He speaks to me through a thought, as if it's the real me. Thoughts sound in my head. He doesn't want me to be who I really want to be. When I do something wrong, he gets angry. When I try to hurt myself, he stops me in a rude manner. When I think about something I shouldn't do or I think about something shameful, he can hit me. He doesn't let me kill myself. He does what it takes to prevent this from happening. If you remember, in one of the notes he had this comment. Usually, this real me stops me, but this time, when it happened again, I don't feel his help. He stops protecting me. I managed to meet and get acquainted with his mom. And that's what his mother said. When I first saw her, it became clear that, like any mother, she was worried about her son's condition. She said, "For already a year, doctors haven't been able to explain to me what's going on with him. He regularly gets treatment. However, he is always in the same state as you've just seen him, which is even a better state. So nothing changes. They don't tell us what the diagnosis is. They don't explain why this is happening to him. We've been to different clinics. It's clear that we feel exhausted." And I said, "What do you think is happening to your son? How did it all begin to happen?" Mom's story began with, "Well, you see, a girlfriend, this is such an age, and so on." That is, there was an attempt to find an external cause. I said, "Okay, could you tell me about his childhood? What was he like?" And further goes a trivial story by his mother, who is sort of trying to justify herself. It's very scary to show that you are a bad mother. Who is scared? Who forms this image in us? We all know that this image of our ego is how consciousness describes itself. We are again talking about consciousness. And so the mother started telling everything was fine, he was a wonderful boy, he was growing up, playing with children, he was active and lively. But I think after the third grade, when the class was disbanded and we had to transfer him to another school where new classmates didn't accept him, he started crying, asking, "Please transfer me to another place." He was forced to go to this school for 9 years. He hated going to the school every day. He cried at home, but his mother was insisting, "Don't fool me, another school is too far." What is your family relationship like? What kind of relationship do you have with your husband? What kind of relationship does the boy have with his father? And here I saw the same fierceness in the mother as that in the boy. This is a complicated topic. After the child's birth, our relationship worsened drastically. My husband became a terrible, demanding despot. He was constantly making claims against our son. He didn't like everything that the child was doing. He kept saying that the child wasn't what he should be like. I said, "And what did you tell your husband?" And then she started such an emotional speech about how bad her husband was, despite the fact that they have been together for 19 years. I asked her, "And what's good about your husband?" "Well, is there anything good about him?" "There's nothing good about this monster." And here we can see the external environment the boy has to live in. A child is born, grows up in a parental conflict, in constant, I would say, hatred and aversion of his mother to his father. For almost 20 years, the woman has been in this state. I asked her, "Do you love your son? He is the meaning and purpose of my life. How can you ask me about this?" Yet, I have another question. Is it possible to love a child while hating your other close person? What is it, love or obsession with the child? I haven't managed to build a good relationship with my husband, so I'll build a special relationship with my child. Special in what? In my significance, in assertion of my power. I was unable to establish power over my husband, so I will establish it over my child. I noticed that she had a necklace with a cross, and I asked her, "Are you a believer?" She said, "Of course. Now I go to church all the time. I pray, I ask God. For what? So that my son recovers." Okay, if we truly believe, no matter how each of us perceives faith, there is one common concept that God is love. And if we believe in God, if we accept Him, then why do we so cruelly take away this right to change something in relationships, and why do we sentence our close people this way? I asked her, "Have you tried to talk to your husband? Explain what you don't like, what you don't agree with?" It's impossible to talk to this monster. Well, you see, I keep saying, just like the boy, the mother is constantly thinking, he's a monster, he is bad, it's 100% his fault. And then I just said, you see, no one is ever 100% guilty. As many people participate in a situation, just as many equal contributions they make to this situation. Can you say, well, just think, what did you yourself do that could cause your husband's irritation, aversion, and provoke all those conflicts? There is a point which I'd like to draw everyone's attention to. I asked her to give an example of cruelty or unfair demands towards the child. She thought for a while and said, well, for example, people living in the villages keep a wonderful tradition of greeting each other. Good day, hello, this kind of messages, a wish of something good. Well, I don't know, as for me, I like it very much. And so when the boy would pass by an old neighbor, an old lady, or someone else whom he didn't want to say hi to, his father would point it out and tell him that he had to greet people. It's good to say such words as good afternoon and hello, and he insisted on that, while the mother immediately would reply, why do you carpet the child? If he doesn't want, it's his choice. This old man is deaf anyway.
Look, there are very significant and important points in the information provided in this example. Firstly, the child is constantly under internal pressure. He talks unwillingly and doesn't want to open up with any of the specialists. He hides it. He also agreed that perhaps there were some external problems, and, let's say, his consciousness accepted the rules of this game, and he plays with the specialists. Well, yes, I broke up with a girl. Well, yes, my relationship with my father isn't very good. Well, my mother doesn't bother me much. Let's imagine his family. On the one hand, there is a father who tyrannizes him, who has his own programs, and he wants his child to implement them.
Does he actually tyrannize him, or it's the mother who tyrannizes everyone?
And the mother as well. That's the environment in which the child is living. Thus, now anyone who is watching this program can say, guys, pardon me, and how does suicide relate to relationships? How does suicide relate to a family? It relates directly to them. If it happened to someone other than your relative or a close person, does it mean that this topic isn't related to relationships? And I want to ask you a question right away. Who is telling you that? How do you hear that in your head? At this very moment.
This situation very clearly shows that suicide is a consequence of those relationships in the family in which the boy was growing up. What kind of thoughts prevailed in him? What claims did he have on himself and on people around him? What traumatized him the most? For him, the relationships are associated with pain and fear. He's afraid of them. He doesn't know how to communicate with people, to evoke joy. He doesn't know what to do to create good relationships. He doesn't even understand it. He doesn't have such an example. We know that thoughts, emotions, and desires are means by which consciousness manifests itself. What have I read out from the diary? The boy was constantly preoccupied with these thoughts. He was simply describing them in the diary, writing them all down. That is, the trigger is a thought. When a thought enters, it provokes a certain emotional state, and he describes the state as torturous. That puts a great pressure on him and prevents him from being able to handle it. And if such a message goes, we know anyway that 80 to 90% of thoughts, all thoughts coming to our consciousness, are negative. And in this case, we can see selective thoughts aimed at committing a murder or suicide. You must kill yourself, you are worthless, you are nothing. And such messages are broadcasted 24 hours a day throughout the year. It's a fact. What is the reason? Doctors have no clue. They don't know what the reason is. Here is the direct reason. If attention is switched from these thoughts to something else, his state can change. I will give relevant examples later on. So, while under the pressure of such thoughts, it's impossible to do anything if he associates himself with these thoughts, although at the same time he is trying to differentiate these selves within him. Another example is a 15-year-old girl. Her mother addressed me for consultation seeking help. The girl came because her mom had asked her, concerned with her suicide attempt. She had cut her veins on her wrists. When the girl came in, it was the same thing as with the boy from the previous story. She was a little more lively, but still didn't want to talk or analyze the situation. She said right away, "I have come here only because my mom asked me to. Otherwise, I'm all right." And she said this "I'm all right" in a very cold, indifferent voice. "Why do you think your mom is worried and asked you to come here?" "Well, because I cut my wrists." And then she said the following. A few 15-year-old girls, classmates, got together at one of the girls' houses. They bought a bottle of wine, while another girl brought a bottle of beer and someone else took a bottle of vodka from their parents. At first, each of them had half a glass of wine, after which one of the girls said, "Who of you could dare to cut your wrists?" Who was talking through this girl? We've been analyzing this, and I've just quoted exactly the same thing. The monster was becoming more frightening and started to show himself more actively, demanding that I would kill myself after I had a drink. The same thing here. The girls had half a glass of wine each, and we've already explained that even the smallest amount of alcohol deprives a person, his personality, of the connection with his soul, with the spiritual world, deprives him of the support of that power, the only power that can resist such evil. And so the person is left under the control of his consciousness, Secondary consciousness gets activated due to small amounts of consumed alcohol. It's exactly secondary consciousness that sends these negative thoughts and images, or other negative forces can become active and increase this influence. Well, the girls drank some more, doses were increasing. Therefore, as she said it herself, we quickly passed out, just fell asleep. But this sleep is not physiological sleep. And this must be understood, because this is severe brain hypoxia. In this condition, the body can die from a smallest action that increases breathing, and so the brain gives a command to prevent it. It's more like a loss of consciousness, which helps the body to recover. I'm saying this for people to understand, not just think I got drunk and fell asleep. This is not simply falling asleep. After this, they got together a couple more times, but she had a thought to try it again. And when she was at home, thank God her younger brother was at home too, she decided to try doing it being sober. She cut veins on her wrists, meaning she performed this action. The action turned out to be much stronger, as if she was told, do it harder. And she said it. She said, I decided. I heard a thought to do it harder. She pressed harder. When she pressed harder, it's good her brother was there to help her bandage her wrist and stop the bleeding. She actually got scared. Once she started telling this, she had tears in her eyes, and it was obvious that she was worried. But when I asked her, why did you actually do it again? What was before you had this thought? She started crying and said, I won't tell anything more. And that's all. She asked permission to leave. This was the end of our first meeting. When I met with the mother, it was hard to tell her this. But what was happening in the family at that time? The father had lost his job. Well, this was a period of a new business development for many. He had some problems. He was very upset about that because he had a family, 3 children, and he was a responsible man. Everything used to be easy for him. He used to be successful. And then she told me my dissatisfaction in this regard was increasing, plus the workload, she said. The workload naturally increased because we had 3 children. She had to take on more work. She was a translator. She had her own business. And her husband started drinking more and more. So he would have wine and sometimes vodka. All this was observed by their children. I tried to tell him many times, but nothing worked. Before that, she said, we lived like all other families. Not that we didn't have any conflicts. She says, I loved this man very much. He was my closest, dearest person, and we had been living quite happily for a long time. I had no complaints about my husband. But then her dissatisfaction began to grow. Plus she had an agency, a dating agency. So her attention was always focused on women who successfully solved their problems by immigrating abroad. And even if something went wrong in their lives, or not according to their plan, they were able to fix it. Understandably, she began to ponder over that. I started, she said, having thoughts like, maybe I should do the same. I'm the owner of the agency. I can definitely find someone for myself. But later, something unpredictable happened, she said. She had an old acquaintance, a woman who was also her client. They knew each other for a long time, and this client had a son. She knew her son since his childhood. He was older than her daughter, and she also knew that her daughter liked him. Her daughter was secretly in love with him. She said, sometimes I joked and laughed, saying he was older than her. She said, being a woman, intuitively I felt that this love would be tragic and unrequited. And I tried to draw her attention away from him. In the meantime, the boy often came to her office to help her install some programs, give some instructions, and so on. So he was often at her office. At some point in time, she said, I felt this irresistible desire towards this young man. It's the man who was just a little older than her daughter and whom she knew as long ago as since he was a child. At first, this thought scared me, but it was followed by some crazy desire that was hard to resist, she said. I'm a mature woman, a mother of 3 children. At first I got scared, but this thought kept returning to me every time he came, she said. I could barely hold myself back. And so she said, I spoke to my girlfriends, who told me not to be crazy. Sharing with her girlfriends, she tried to stop herself. The girls told her, you understand that first of all, this is a crazy situation, and secondly, it won't lead to anything good. Think about your daughter. Not only the situation is foolish as such, but think about your daughter and what will happen if she finds out. Nothing stopped her. At some point in time, she said, I just wasn't able to stop myself, and I got involved with this young man. The girl found out about that. Here we can speak of the external circumstances only. On the one hand, the father, who became more detached, got more irritable, surely under the influence of alcohol, meaning what was happening to the father? His consciousness became more active. He simply fell under the control of consciousness, taking into account that every day or two, beer or wine was constantly there. The mother was in total negativity and irritation. Her claims against her husband were growing. She couldn't cope with her attraction towards the young man. From the outside, she was a reasonable, mature, educated, and intelligent woman. She considered herself to be a person who could control herself well enough. Moreover, she condemned such things in herself. What did the mother's state begin with? With a thought. A thought came to her. Why not think of arranging my life differently? And how much I like this young man. Again, the starting mechanism was a thought. Where did the thought come from? From consciousness. That's it. And we can talk about anything, that there were such circumstances. In any case, it is possible to make a different choice. And having calmed herself down, she was aware of the fact that she had to make a different choice. But she didn't cope with that.
Yet, at the same time, I consider it necessary to note 2 points from Diana's story, which are quite important for everyone, specifically the second situation. The family where the child attempted suicide as a result of her parents' relationship. Let's call it Santa Barbara. Tell me, please, who is talking about all this? Who was complaining in this woman? Who was pushing her to all that? And the most important thing is, when analyzing this situation, I believe all of you can clearly see a moment when a desire emerged in her.
Following the thought.
And what is a desire? A desire is a request to the system. I want a beautiful fairy tale relationship, just like at my work. Here you go. However, did she get such a fairy tale after all? And what did all this develop into? What did eventually happen to her daughter?
We can begin with the last story, although they are certainly interrelated. And if we take such common points, what does the boy demonstrate with this alienation, this fierceness, and even the cynicism? The person has so many claims to the whole world, to all people in general, to God. That is, everything is totally wrong. Everything is wrong with every person, and everything is wrong with himself. If we summarize the environment he grew up in, its pretensions, in this environment the guy was growing up, basically internalizing it all. Of course, he could have made a completely different choice, but he begins to listen to the same thoughts. They came to his consciousness, just like they used to come to the consciousness of his parents. And this pity, self-pity, claims to all people around, desire for more, are coming from consciousness, from egoism. And if he doesn't get what he wants, as in his case, he commits the act. What is suicide? It's a rebellion. It's a protest intended to show an extreme point that nothing and no one exists at all. I find nothing good either in myself or in the neighborhood, and I'm showing this to you in such a way, meaning this deed is of such character. And what is strongly expressed in his diary is that he cannot explain things, having only external reasons. He is experiencing some pressure, influence of a third force, which he cannot explain, and these waves, fluctuations of good mood and then of such total despair, hopelessness or emptiness, which is the most...
He's been held by his collar like a puppet.
Yes, right.
He's released and then hooked.
As soon as the third force we talked about has released him, in any case, it's the influence of the system through human consciousness, through these thoughts. It releases him. Then it hooks him again. He thinks, I just don't have the strength to do it. But suddenly, out of the blue, he gets some strength to sit at the computer and start looking for even more negativity there, which we still
Provoke emotions.
Right, I have a feeling that it will provoke a more vivid emotion and he'll be urged to implement it. Meaning the potential is gaining momentum, and what is controlling the boy at this moment clearly directs, leads him to this implementation. When we look at the case with a girl, we definitely see the influence of a third force on the child. And it's interesting how the mother came to this, how it worked here, this discontent with the husband's situation. He's not the one, I deserve someone better than him. She was constantly seeing pictures of how beautiful and romantic relationships of her clients are and what kind of matches they find for themselves. But we do know how this works from the very beginning.
Yes, sure, this is a very important point.
And what will happen next?
After all, she works there, and she perfectly understands this field from inside out, and that this candy is brightly wrapped, and where it is sold. In fact, everything might be different. So what is this? These are speculations of consciousness.
Of course, and once again, the most interesting thing is how consciousness works. It emphasizes exactly these initially bright and romantic moments in relationships, passionate moments. Desires are being stimulated. As it seems to me, particularly this desire was being nurtured in her. I want something else, but what? Well, something passionate, full of emotions. And from where did the entry occur, the entry of third forces? Well, obviously, it all entered through the mother. For the girl, it was already a consequence of her mother's choice, in fact, the mother's decision. Obviously, it's not that something is wrong with the mother herself, for she has a family with 3 children. And it took some time for the aggressor, for the system, to influence her at that moment, which caused such a selfish reaction. And the woman, let's say by choosing the agreeing to this, couldn't stop anymore. And so, as Diana has said, no matter what kind of rational arguments were given, she still couldn't stop, meaning it all didn't work. No logic, no appeal either for morality, for ethics, or for anything else. She understood everything, but still, being in a state of narrowed consciousness, she allowed herself to be led by this desire only.
She was implementing her desire.
She was implementing the desire, right?
In spite of everything.
Basically, this implanted program from the system, in spite of everything, and she was ready for anything in order to have what she wanted. And this is a vivid example of this egocentrism of human consciousness. And of course, when this happens, third forces can seize control over a person when he or she is, so to say, in such an absolutely animal state, because there is nothing human in this anymore. And not only were third forces naturally interested in the mother, but first and foremost in the girl. This suicidal attempt of the teenager was, first of all, that main trophy for the system, which the girl was actually being led to. This was the most desirable prize which they intended to get in the end. Well, in addition, I understand that this also affected all the children in this family.
Now I'd like to voice another quote by Igor Mikhailovich. Thoughts are implantations that originate from consciousness and are obviously predetermined. But people just don't understand that it's a written scenario. Let's put it simply, for them. And for this scenario, there is a director. Let's call him the devil. That is, the director is exactly the devil, whereas our consciousness is demons. I'm now listening to Tanya's commentary. This story is going over in my mind again, and if we take a look at this, there is nothing accidental in this story. Yes, there is a feeling that someone is really preparing and managing the scenario for the girl. With this particular boy, as if it hits where it hurts the most in a targeted way, which provokes the strongest conflicts and emotions. The situation with the boy is escalated, not only the pressure and negativity in the family being intensified supposedly by chance, due to his school class being discontinued and the necessity to be transferred to another school, but also he is not accepted by his classmates, meaning the relationships around him are getting completely ruined, and new relationships are dominated by pain and fear. You must be alone, which is being constantly transmitted from consciousness in all situations.
It seems to be quite a frequent situation when conflicts arise in families. Many people believe that such conflicts happen somewhere, someone else has them. But many think that this doesn't concern me. However, as a matter of fact, if we look around, such imprints and such seemingly complicated, at first glance, confusing things turn out to be everywhere and next to us. And if we look, even those people living nearby often experience basically the same. As for suicides, I actually happened to encounter this. There was even a specific example that one mother also told me that she also had a troubled daughter. The relationships in the family were very complicated. She had a complicated relationship with her husband, and there were also several suicide attempts. And everything is quite sad in this story, but there is just one thing. The girl's mother is a psychologist, meaning she knows this field very well. That's the field of her expertise. Yet what is interesting is that when something happens directly to her daughter, she says that she sort of forgets all of these rules, as if she forgets what is going on. She gets confused and turns into the mother, as she herself says. She runs to rescue and indulge her daughter. Then she comes to her senses and prescribes medication. And this situation constantly reoccurs, and there is an impression that someone is playing this scenario. And not just someone, but the scenario is being played for specific purposes, for specific goals. It turns out that not only people continuously experience long-lasting emotions that feed those very third forces, but in addition, a deep imprint takes place in a child since the early years. And so, in addition to the fact that the system is being directly fed, this feeding is also programmed for many, many years, and later on the stereotype will be transmitted. And unfortunately, if a person has no idea of this knowledge, he doesn't know how to get out of this. Even having an advanced medical education and being familiar with those mechanisms, which are often traditionally applied in these situations in psychiatry and psychology. That is, without the knowledge of what is really behind this and who is a scriptwriter, it is almost impossible to stop this process. A person is like in bondage, and those third forces simply cover the person's eyes.
Today it is better to start, I believe, with the basics. A family, this is close to everyone. Well, it's clear that everyone interprets this word in their own way. In Slavic languages, semya, family means semya, 7 cells, no matter how you twist it, but it's an I in multitude. This understanding has existed since ancient times. Yet what is family nowadays? Well, if we put philosophy aside, if we remove fancy words, what do we have left? We live long, happily, with our other halves, but in constant confrontation, isn't that so? Well, actually, it's possible to achieve unity in a family, on some issues and at times through certain arguments. And someone is against as usual, isn't it so? Yet, why do these protests take place? Why do complications arise in a family? Why don't children find common language with parents or vice versa, parents with children? After all, it's elementary and simple, there is always confrontation from our consciousness. But sometimes we don't know this. And we don't know because we have simply forgotten. If we take, let's say, any religion, this is mentioned there, and it is also said that we should love each other. But also, thanks to love, we can gain peace. Already here, and peace first of all in our family, and most importantly, peace within ourselves. For as a matter of fact, all divisions, all quarrels, scandals, rows, misunderstanding of one another start not with someone who doesn't agree with us, but with ourselves. After all, sometimes we don't want to find common ground with our interlocutor, with our other half, with our children, our parents, and so on. We want things to be our way, while they want it their way. And without understanding and knowing these simple elementary things, it's very hard to come to an agreement. And in this case, authority should work, the authority of parents over their children. But parenting is wonderful. And their authority should be in place. However, there should be no authority but respect, worthy, well-deserved respect. Because any authority collapses. Kids grow up, they become adults, and they are able to make decisions on their own, and at the time they become smarter than we are. This is really so. The world doesn't stand still. We get stuck in our time. Kids grow up in their time. It's okay. But the only thing that remains unshakable is love. First and foremost, love for God. If we have sincere, true love for God, we will have love for each other too. And there will be peace in the family, and in fact, certain issues may arise, but solutions will always be found, and there will never be any resentment. Now we are approaching simple things. What is resentment? Why do we have certain disagreements arising in the family? Someone gave us a wrong look, said something wrong. Isn't that so? We all have families. Does anyone really want to hurt their family member? Here's a simple question. Of course not. But they often take offense at us. Why? Not because we want to hurt them, but because their consciousness tells them that we've done something wrong, right? Because of this, a conflict arises. Consciousness tells, nothing more. But if a person were developing spiritually, really sincerely, striving for God, he would understand. After all, the first steps taken on the path to the spiritual world imply studying oneself, studying one's consciousness. There are lots of examples of how consciousness manipulates personality and how it changes things.
I could give you two more examples of such imprints, which might look very different from each other. But in fact, they have a single common root. One is an example of despotism in a family, and the other is an example of a family divorce. There seems to be no interconnection, but you will see there is a direct interconnection between these two things. The first situation is a family where relationships would seem to be great. It's a stable and successful family with good children. They were already grown up. They have been living together for many years. However, when you encounter these family relationships more closely, the wife turns out to be a provocateur of conflicts in the family. And at certain stages, she pushes her husband to splash negative emotions, meaning scandals emerge. She herself says later on that she, as if someone is pushing her to do that, as if someone is saying, let's make a scene. And it results in the fact that the husband picks up an axe or a chair and starts chasing the wife. The wife surely calls her children, and the sons come, and seemingly a conflict should be handled in this situation. But on the contrary, a conflict grows with greater force. Fightings and beatings break out, whereas a husband tries to use his wife as a human shield and threatens to kill her. In all cases, he aggravates a conflict and provokes the children even more, even further, so that they beat him. He makes sure to be bleeding. He tries to smear everyone with blood, and then this situation slowly ceases. It's interesting that here, on top of everything else, alongside this aggression, an alliance of the children and the mother against the father also occurs. But not always he manages to end up a conflict with such beatings. Sometimes he runs outside, and such fightings take place with whoever happens. Then another alliance appears. The whole family unites on the side of the father and beats up the passerby who has happened to be at hand. By all means, these conflicts spread on people around. When I talked to those people face to face, each of them said, I don't want this. I want to live happily, peacefully. Everything is great, but it seems as if somebody's pushing them to that. And it turns out that the trigger and the person who triggered this scenario was always the mother. Further on, when I observed the life of this family, it turned out that the very same stereotype and exactly the same pattern of behaviour were instilled in their children. They also implemented approximately the same scenario in their families. This is one situation, and a completely different situation in family divorces. It seems there is no interconnection, but nevertheless, I happened to get married more than once, and unfortunately my marriages ended in divorces. And upon divorce, as a rule, I heard the same phrase: I cannot control you. I am losing control over you. And upon divorce, well, it would be understandable. You hear, you become a victim. You were not understood. You were not accepted. And that's it. But when I got acquainted with the knowledge, the primordial knowledge, when I read the books, first of all, the Alatra book, listened to the program, Consciousness and Personality, from the inevitable dead to the eternally alive, and began to analyze these situations, it turned out to be quite a trivial thing. As a matter of fact, all the divorces occurred not when my wives made claims, but precisely when my egoistic nature lost control of the situation. It means not I was stopped to be controlled, but I lost control of the situation. So it was me who behaved selfishly, worrying that I was losing domination and control. And then I left, giving up everything. And when I retrospectively analysed my life, I came across the fact that at the age of 2 or 3, there was an episode when I was left alone at home for a short period of time. And I was persuaded, stay at home for a little while, we'll be back soon. But at that moment, I didn't like that. And I clearly remember that I heard the voice in my head, you've been abandoned. Let's revenge. I simply went out on the apartment, having left the door wide open, having left everything, and was calmly sitting outside, waiting for an effect from my behaviour. Later on, I was naturally given full attention. I was comforted, loved. Everything was wonderful and nice. But this imprint, if your wish is not fulfilled, you must give up everything and leave. This imprint was being implemented throughout my life. So what do these two examples have in common? In both cases, the system made an imprint since childhood, since adolescence, since the very early childhood, when consciousness is forming. That is, people were observing behavioural stereotypes, and these behavioural stereotypes were instilled in them. This stereotype got automatically activated in situations which resembled it at least a little. And it becomes clear that breaking this chain is only possible by understanding the whole sense of it and the primordial knowledge. That is, by understanding who is the scriptwriter of this and what it is for.
It is possible to break this chain by starting with oneself in the first place. Zhenya, thank you. You have given very illustrative examples and, in fact, expanded our topic even further. Because, speaking of relationships further, the issue of children naturally arises in the family as well. Of course, quite an extensive topic of alliances arises, and how roles are changing. When in families, alliances emerge, and unification takes place, specifically on the basis of consciousness, on the basis of egoism. A mother and children unite against a drinking father. Once he sobers up, he immediately unites with children against mother suppression, which manifests itself in hypercare, and we can even say in sort of excessive and extremely fanatical protection. Then the husband and the wife unite against children who don't behave according to the expectations of their consciousness. And it happens all the time. And this shift of coalitions, changing of partners, occur day after day, year after year. Children see it and internalize it. Manipulative children who subdue the entire family, from parents to grandparents, aunts, uncles, and neighbors, are now a very common and widespread phenomenon in our society. The secret is that they simply find a key to their mom's consciousness, a key to their dad's consciousness, and so on and so forth. Whereas it is important to understand that there can be not just one child in a family. The number doesn't matter. Out of 3, 4, 5, or even 10, the favorite becomes the one who has found these keys to the parent's consciousness. Yet, is it actually the child who manipulates? And who initiates and intensifies all this? I will highlight a very important point for everyone. We are not discussing men, we are not discussing women, husbands, wives, sisters, children, and so on. We are discussing manifestation of consciousness. We are discussing manifestation of the system. And as Zhenya has said, and as Diana has already said today, there is a film director behind all these events. And our task today is to pull this puppeteer out into the light, the one who manipulates families, society, and every person, and to cut the strings of manipulation. And do you know why our games are unique? It is because specialists, to whom people come with these issues, begin to speak openly, that they experience just the same, that they are in the same situation. And the most amazing thing is that without the knowledge which is outlined in the hypothesis, I will explicitly say, any therapy in modern psychiatry is useless. Seclude yourself up anywhere. Take as many pills and new medications as you want. It will still not rid you of the fear which the boy and the girl had in the above-mentioned examples, because they were afraid that those voices would harm them. But who imposed that fear on them? And why don't specialists dispel this illusion? Everything goes the way and according to the script which this film director named Satan or the system has written. So let's abandon this theater and just leave.
I'd like to give an example about directing. One of these practical examples, which was very convincing in this regard from my professional experience, was the fact that there is the work of the system. There is a director who plays a performance involving different family members, naturally for his own interests. A man addressed me, complaining about obsessive thoughts, jealousy towards his wife. That is, he suspected his wife of having an affair, and he had opportunities to check her. Eventually, he received evidence that he was wrong. She was absolutely innocent, but nevertheless, doubtful thoughts immediately came to him. What if they overlooked her and she does have a lover, and they failed to see everything, and his suspicions are justified? He hated himself for these suspicions, for these thoughts. And after such pictures, where he saw his wife cheating on him and how exactly she was doing that and who she was doing it with, all these actions and checks followed, meaning such thoughts were brought into action. There seemed to be no logical reason. There was nothing but immediately thoughts of self-accusation, self-torture occurred, that you were a goner, you had no love, you couldn't cope with this rubbish that was coming to your mind. He was literally sobbing from all these states while being alone, and he felt his helplessness, sort of inability to handle it. And this had been going on for 3 years. That is, the person had been living in this condition with these thoughts for 3 years. He didn't make scenes of jealousy to his wife. He didn't show it in their relationship in any way. He hid it as much as he could. He himself was ashamed of his jealous rage and that someone would find out about it. 3 years later, when he came, besides these thoughts of jealousy, there started to come such bright pictures of how he and his wife together or how he would kill himself and in what way, and how his wife would react. He described these pictures of him together with his wife drinking poisonous wine, after which they would die, so it was a deadly poison. These were the thoughts that lately started coming to him more often.
It's like the story of Romeo and Juliet.
Yes, he even started looking for information about poisons that could be used by adding them to alcohol. Interestingly, when we began to analyze those thoughts and images which were coming, he said that his wife was very beautiful, and in her youth, many young men in their company were jealous of him and obviously coveted his wife. He saw this by their looks, he saw it by the phrases they said, and it turned him on, meaning he experienced sexual arousal due to the fact that his wife was the woman coveted by many men. These thoughts of jealousy, which he was having over those 3 years, were accompanied by fantasies. He is now middle-aged, over 40 already. They have 2 grown-up children. They have been married for quite a long time, but his wife has lost her attractiveness. He no longer observes any passionate looks at her from anyone. So, even before the jealousy thoughts, he started fantasizing in every detail about his wife having sex with someone right in front of him. The most interesting thing is that, along with disgust, he felt an urge to continue watching these pictures in his head. And furthermore, sexual arousal appeared. And exactly when he was watching this movie, in his head, their sex became very bright, passionate, as in their youth. And already a bit later, these ideas of jealousy appeared, that his wife was cheating on him with someone. We know that this is actually at the level of instincts, like being an alpha male. This definitely boosted his ego,
Pleased him.
pleased his pridefulness. He felt as if he was that very alpha male who possessed a woman wanted by many. And that's when everything was fine in sexual life. Yet the most interesting thing is that when he voiced all this to his wife, she blushed and asked for the phone number of the psychologist whom he consulted with. When she came to me and we talked, she told me that around the same time as her husband, she was also unhappy with her life and relationship. She had a lot of thoughts, complaints, and discontent towards her husband. She wanted something different, something more. She was getting images of how maybe it would be possible to be with someone else. She began to imagine how she was having sex with another man. These thoughts started coming to her further more often, first just sporadically, then in her dreams, and such dreams began to appear. Eventually, these thoughts began to appear right in the middle of being intimate with her husband. She fantasized about how she was with someone else, and only then she would become passionate like in her youth. As for her husband, during that time, he had a different stream of images, how someone else was having sex with his wife, and only then did he have this passion. That is, 2 people in one bed are totally absent, not just they are in some kind of physical intimacy.
In the same 3-dimensionality, but in different realities.
Like they're living in totally different movies at that moment, and it is happening simultaneously. It's like a director playing a movie. It already came to a thought and beginning of planning an extended suicide. From my practice, I can tell you that this is, in general, a very widespread situation, but no one talks about it. What do we see here? Clearly, we see the influence of third forces. No one was interested in such kind of relationship. It's simply a theater of the absurd. 2 people are unhappy for absolutely no reason. Who is interested in this entire absurdity? Now we understand, relying on the knowledge from the books, from the *ALLATRA book, and from programs with Igor Mikhailovich Danilov, that in this case there is an interest of only those third forces which were having feeding on both the husband and the wife. Moreover, they wanted to dine even fancier, when all this would finish when an extended suicide in the end. That is, the influence of parasites is absolutely obvious. When I encountered this story, I couldn't imagine how, without this knowledge, I would understand what was happening there. These two people are absolutely not interested in existing in such a hell. After having lived together for 25 years and having raised their children, they just want to be happy together.
You know, in this story, it is very important to explain, first of all, to ourselves and to those who are watching us, what the harmfulness of these images is. I want to tell you honestly, today it is impossible to find a person who doesn't fantasize about anything, especially about sexual relationships. Those images, which are displayed on the screens of computers, TVs, glossy magazines, and billboards, they are simply stimulating a person to do so. However, the problem is that not many people understand the harmfulness and the essence of this phenomenon.
Moreover, conventional psychology doesn't see anything wrong in this, and on the contrary, it recommends fantasize more and you will have more intense sensations. Nothing is bad here. Do you have any intimacy issues? Well, everything can be fixed. We do understand how all this is being simulated through the film industry and so on. By the way, that man, when he came for consultation, clearly told me, I don't watch porn. My wife and I love my wife. And if you start telling me that the problem is that I'm a pervert...
Yes, but he didn't say that he was watching it in his head.
Right, and later on, when we analyzed this, it turned out that he was watching it to the fullest, but it was only in the form of those thoughts which came to him, and he accepted them, enjoyed them, and was basically in this porn film, but in his consciousness.
However, the most amazing point is that not only him.
Yes, the most interesting thing is that they were doing it together and it was all very synchronized. It's impossible to figure out who was the initiator, that is, who actually provided the original impetus for that tragic, almost tragic scenario, which have been lasting for 3 years. By the way, the wife noted that she started getting sick.
She was drained.
Some kind of sleepiness, drowsiness appeared. It started to be difficult for her. She was drained. She already had physical asthenia, meaning her immune system also began to suffer. The man also lost 10 kilograms during that time. He was constantly under negative emotions, under stress, and he said that there wasn't a single day when he was happy over those 3 years. It was a constant struggle and some kind of madness during which he couldn't catch a break neither during the day nor at night, although there was no reason for it.
Here, by the way, it is really important to understand, while explaining the situation with the loss of energy, well, we talked about this in the previous games.
Why does it happen?
Yes, for the system, it is much more advantageous to replay any action or event in one's head than to bring it to reality in three-dimensionality. There occurs, let's say, a completely different harvesting. And it is clearer that a person is pushed to this. Look, how remarkably and attractively all of this is integrated in society as a norm, starting from the families and then spreading onto society. Why talking about this? There is nothing out of the ordinary. Just fantasize on any topic. It doesn't matter what it is. Relationships, work, dreams, vacation. What is the difference? And this was also discussed in more than one series of programs.
In the program The Invisible World, these mechanisms are clearly analyzed. What a tremendous energy draining occurs to the point that it damages the immune system, including physical health of people, not to mention the constant feeding of the parasite of these third forces through negative emotions and desires, passion, and so on.
Pardon me, here's the key point. Again, which of you hasn't experienced an obsession of a thought? A thought is not yours, you haven't ordered it, you don't want it. But it comes and keeps spinning and it dominates all day long, especially if it's negative. Well, positive thoughts don't keep spinning. They give delight and they are rare. Whereas negative thoughts, especially if you're useless, you're worthless, or you're being cheated or anything else, this entire negative stuff, and all this negative stuff goes round and round in people's heads. Tell me, if you are free citizens, so to say, and you possess consciousness, you are the king of nature, then there is a simple question. And why do you order such thoughts that eat you? It's a simple question. Do you need them? You don't. You suffer from them. So why Do you allow them to stay in your head all the time? Don't we live that way? We're living in our fantasies. Spinning in the head all the time, we speak with someone we don't see. We communicate with someone we don't know. We desire something we don't need at all, but we think that it is happiness, as if once we achieve that, we will be happy. We achieve that, and where do we stay? Again, nowhere. Because whatever you achieve here, you will still be unhappy. Our idea of happiness is determined, has been determined by our ancestors. A house, a family, children, prosperity, health. But even those people present here who have all of these, are they happy? By human standards, yes. And internally? No. Yet, in such case, why are people so sad when they find out that their bodies should die soon? What's the reason of sorrow? And what's the reason of sadness that one hasn't done anything? And why in the old age everything that is left for us is to tell our grandchildren or kids about what kind of heroes we were, right? About what we have built, have done, or something else. While we have nothing to tell about tomorrow, because we don't have tomorrow. Subpersonality has only the past by which it will live and be guided for the rest of its life, living through those dirty emotions. And just note, most of our thoughts are actually negative. 90% of thoughts during the day, safe to say, is sheer negativity. The one who irritates us and causes a certain emotion, some argument, some dependence. Again, an emotion spends these powers, throws them away, and consumes unconsciousness, let's say as a part of the system, along with lots of other quite intelligent beings. Hiding in the shadows, they do the same.
I'd like to share understanding regarding the scenarios which consciousness creates for us. They get imprinted since childhood. My parents didn't get on very well, and of course I saw all this. And all my childhood I was dreaming of a prince. How I would meet that prince who would love me very much and with whom I would live a very beautiful, very happy life. And consciousness drew all these pictures for me. And indeed, everything was great, up to a certain point when my consciousness got confused. So, here is happiness, but what's next? And then it shows another picture, where my prince loves another woman, and I must commit suicide. And after that, sobbing over my corpse, he understands how good and great I was, and he realizes his mistake, but it's too late. My consciousness is in such euphoria, because he has finally realized and understood that I'm the only one who deserves such love. So here we can see the superiority of this ego, nearly deification of myself. Eventually, all this happened in my life. My first marriage was pretty complicated, and the relationship was, well, just like in other families. It came to the point that I cut my veins. But my husband's reaction shocked me. He quickly bandaged my cuts, put a long shirt on me so that no one could see the cuts, and forbade me to talk about it. We didn't address anywhere. He didn't comfort me. He didn't sob. He didn't tell me that he loved me more than everyone. And this sobered me up. My consciousness understood that it wouldn't work.
When the system establishes its power over personality, another mechanism starts working. Now, having read the books by Anastasia Novak, and having realized what was happening, I can tell from my own experience how I see this situation in my childhood when suicidal thoughts were coming to me. I'm about 11 years old. I'm sitting at my desk doing my homework. It's spring, it's April. The sun is shining, birds are singing, and my attention switches to what is going on outside the window. There are kids' voices, kids are laughing and playing, and I immediately see the picture that I'm there with the kids. After a picture, a thought followed. I wish I were there. It's fun. It's good there. How much longer should I do this homework? It's time to stop. So this series of thoughts ends with a thought order. What happens next? Next comes the following series of thoughts. Go to the balcony and jump out. After that, a picture comes where I see myself on the ground, but I'm alive. And then the following series of thoughts comes. It might not work out, you must be sure. The next thoughts orders appear. Take a knife. Go to the balcony, stab yourself, and jump out right away. Then it will be for sure. Thereafter, I see the following picture. I see myself dead. Lots of emotions, fear, horror. And in the next picture, I see my parents crying, sobbing, suffering from what was happening. After this picture with my parents, I feel sorry for them. And I hear a thought, no, you shouldn't do that. Your parents would suffer from it. And at that point, all the thoughts and images from the system, which were transmitted through consciousness, just ended. Yet, what did really happen when I saw the last pictures and heard the last thoughts that the system offered through consciousness? The personality was looking for a positive motivation to avert that situation. And the system showed the image of suffering parents as this positive motivation. Of course, the personality agreed, because it felt sorry for them, and all those thoughts were left without implementation. But in reality, the system secured its power over the personality. And if we trace the dynamics of how it works, starting from childhood, we will see, and every person can observe it in oneself, how the system makes attempts to set some pattern first, then how it maintains a program, makes some imprints, and then, growing up, we consider it to be our own. It becomes customary for us. And if we return to the topic of pictures, many people will say, these are positive images, positive thoughts, pictures. They give me positive emotions. There is nothing bad. But in fact, the system establishes its power over personality. And it's fatal, because subsequent thoughts, subsequent pictures might be of another quality, and orders might be of another level. Don't just watch a movie where you feel good, but watch a movie where you can do evil. As a rule, at first something little comes, then something more in relation to oneself or to another person. And it's one of the main ideas of that director who writes all these scripts and launches his games, inventing and giving masks to everyone who takes up this role. He triggers these scripts. And, of course, the main food is emotions which people give away.
Yes, and at the same time, it is important to understand the absurdity of such expressions as a good or kind emotion. For whom?
There is another interesting point here. Irina, when you were speaking, there was a very vivid illustration. Was it actually personality that those kind of proposals of care about people came from? In fact, this is really vivid and illustrative example which shows how consciousness gradually accustoms us to execute its orders, including offering alternative, supposedly good options, putting forward an actor-defender. And then this comedy is being performed. One actor provokes a terrible destructive action, causing fear and negative emotions, but there seems to be a second actor, putting forward the second actor right there, who protects you. And consciousness gradually accustoms us to the idea that there is some defense. But in fact, it's a scenario played between the same actors, the actors of consciousness. This is just a scheme of how it literally plays us, creating an illusion of some kind of independence, safety, ability to cope with a situation. Therefore, people often say, I control the situation, I manage the situation, I'm a rational being, and we are proud that our intelligence is endowed with such qualities as the ability to analyze, make decisions, analyze previous situations, and based on this experience, predict future situations, draw conclusions. But obviously, this is not so. It's good that we've started giving examples from our personal lives, because we talk a lot about other people's stories. It's time for us to restore the well-deserved balance and share our own stories. And going back to the question that you, Alexander, have asked, what is the destructive effect of this influence? I'll give an example of my own. Eugene has already given an example of how a mother, being a psychologist, couldn't cope with a situation in her own family. Why? Because she was confused or because what she knew didn't work and was inefficient? Moreover, as a rule, specialists are very frightened by the fact that they become very ashamed. Who is ashamed in them? That they cannot cope with something. Well, I have a special education. I'm a psychiatrist. I'll give an example from my own life. When my daughter was about 5 or 6 years old, I had a conflictual relationship with my husband. There were a lot of negative emotions on the basis of his jealousy. There were constant expectations of another surge of a jealous rage. There were such permanent emotional swings. And the main emotion was pain, resentment, sadness, grief, anger. Everything was mixed. One evening, I was reading a book to my daughter. It was the well-known book, The Wizard of the Emerald City. And one of the characters in this book was the witch Bastinda. We were reading the book in the evening, and I noticed that when I was describing a situation associated with this character, my child got a bit scared. She cuddled up to me, moved closer, hugged me somehow harder with her hands. So obviously the child reacted to that. And then something unbelievable happened to me. Earlier, when I saw that she felt uncomfortable or frightened, well, what would be the mother's normal, natural impulse? To hug her child, to calm her down, to divert her attention, to play something. Well, to support her somehow, right? I'm a mother, I'm with my child for that. But at that moment, something different happened. My voice changed, it became scary. That is, I literally got into the role of this witch. I began to read the tale further with the voice of this terrible witch. As my daughter later recalled, it wasn't just a voice. She moved away from me. She began closing her eyes and she said, "Mom, what are you doing? I'm scared. Stop doing that." That state was like a flick of a switch. I remember it very well. It was the state of a power thrill over another living being. But was it really my state? Or was it the creature that ruled me at that moment, who literally reveled in its power? I came out of that state in the same way as if by flicking a switch, and I wish it happened only once. At that moment, I was horrified. I was crying and apologizing to my daughter, then we hugged. I myself was very scared. But after a few days, the situation was repeated. I had again the same whiff of obsession to retell her that episode, to read that particular part to her. This was repeated probably 4 or 5 times. What is the enormity of this impact? People who are controlled by consciousness, any person, no one represents any exception in this situation. We are constantly open to the influence, the aggressive influence of consciousness and forces behind it. The devil, of course, manages the entire situation as the main director, and he has a lot of assistance for that. And how will it unfold? What program will they impose on another person? Whether it will be in order to frighten your little child, reveling in its power, or it will be in order to cut your wrists, or it will be in order to seduce a young man whom your daughter likes, or to drink a glass of wine, it doesn't matter. That is, any of these orders are aimed at destroying a person, taking his life or the life of another person.
It doesn't matter how this is implemented. The purpose is important. What is it done for? Here is another very common topic that people don't talk about. They are afraid, they are ashamed. And I'm sure that even those people who come to you, they are reluctant to talk about it, about obsessive thoughts and suicide, and about murder. Let's be honest with ourselves. Haven't you ever thought of killing your parents? And those of you who have children, haven't you ever thought of killing your children? Well, let's be honest.
I also had a period when my child was little, and I had a very severe emotional state, and of course, lack of sleep and all that stuff. And I remember the moment I was changing the baby's diaper, and he was crying, and I heard an order-like thought, strangle him. I clearly remember that. And I started shouting at the baby, shaking him. And I had an understanding that it's okay, that there is nothing terrible if I strangle my child right now. Something like, it's all right, you can do it. And it was gone somehow. I just took the child, put him into his crib, left the room, and calmed down. But really, these thoughts, at that moment, I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't know that those were all orders and how all this works. There is just an understanding that if it continued, then I could actually implement this program and do it. Because I really had the idea that it was okay, that I could do it without any sort of.
Without regret. Is this really becoming a norm for people? And why are they afraid of voicing it? The answer is simple and obvious. And each of us, and even each of those who are watching us, and who haven't encountered the knowledge set forth in the hypothesis yet, they know it too. And again, I'd like to raise a very interesting topic about the murder of parents. With what scenarios and what benefits consciousness offers it to us? Because I remember when I was 23 years old and such thoughts came to me, I was simply shocked by them. I couldn't believe. How could I wish my parents to be dead? How could it be? But that wasn't me who wanted them to die. And it was consciousness that wished to benefit from that. And that excessive self-criticism, which prevailed over me for some days, was the implementation of his script as well. But what is hidden behind all that? Banal daily routine, banal thirst for profit and matter. Because our beloved children, whom we bring up in families, and whom we invest time, attention, and money in, just want their parents to die as soon as possible in order to get their property as soon as possible. If you think this isn't true, it is your right. Live in those illusions that you create for yourselves. But beware that the puppeteer who pulls the strings and instills these very programs into you, he simply nourishes and eats well. While our task in these games is to take this creature and pull it out into the light, so that everybody could see and understand there is nothing and nobody to be afraid of.
Just a few months ago, I was in Ukraine. My father is over 80. He needs taking medicines and measuring blood pressure regularly. So, once again, I measured the pressure, prepared the medicine, and such a thought came to my mind. What are you giving him this medicine for? Anyway, nothing will help him. He has already lived his life. What are you... I said to myself, stop. Obviously, I didn't order it. Obviously, I don't want it. I love my father. I want him to stay among us for as long as possible. Because how can one wish death to one's parents? This shocked me so much. It's really not mine. I love my father. When I refused these negative thoughts and switched to love, everything immediately became light and clear.
Thank you, Lena. That's a good example.
I can give you an example. A 14-year-old boy addressed me with the following problem. He started having obsessive thoughts about killing his mother, and it came exactly in the form of an image how this could happen. He saw a knife stab her. The mother turned her back, she was cleaning up and washing the floor. Now push the bucket with soapy water, she will slip and fall to death. Or while she was sleeping, pull a blanket, hold a pillow. That is, images of such a kind started coming to his mind. Moreover, all this escalated, came more often and more intrusive when the mother was demonstrating some control. Where are you? Go and eat. How long will you sit at the computer? Prepare for the exam, for the concert. Something like that. When she began to control and tell him what to do. Or when some kind of hypercare was manifested. At that moment, thoughts were becoming brighter and stronger. The most interesting thing is that when he told his mother about these thoughts as well, I talked to his mother. The mother shared that she had also had the same period. Again, we return to the film director and how often the minds of people in a family work synchronously, and who actually directs all this work, this mental office. The mother had a conflictual relationship with her husband. He insulted and humiliated her. She was offended and she cried. And the following thoughts visited her. I live with him just because I have a son. If I didn't have a son, I would have divorced. And such images also started coming. How everything could be if this child didn't exist. And what a fatal mistake she had actually made when she decided to give the birth to this child. There was such a simultaneity in the work of these consciousnesses. Well, this guy managed to get rid of these obsessive thoughts by working on himself and exposing the work of consciousness together with his mother. While there was another guy in the psychiatric clinic with whom I worked. When these thoughts started coming to him, and this hatred to his mother escalated, consciousness narrowed his thoughts to a notion that she has spoiled your entire life, she is the only one who is guilty, and if she doesn't exist, everything will be fine. He inflicted several dozens of stab wounds on his mother and ended up in involuntary treatment. When he began to recover a little bit, he himself was surely shocked by what he had done and why. And it was a complete absurdity. He received nothing, none of the bonuses which had been drawn by his consciousness at that moment. He didn't get any egoistic, materialistic bonuses, absolutely nothing. He simply lost everything and took away a human life. And in general, he was in a state of depression and guilt. The situation was yet absolutely irreparable. He just stayed in such a negative emotional state. Who stands behind this? Who stands behind a person's decision to commit such actions? It is clear that behind this stands a beast, and he dictates. And if we don't admit this presence in us, in our lives, we will have no chance to get rid of this dictatorship. We will be only engaged in self-deception that everything is fine and put the masks of decency while having a nightmare inside, which is happening to this day.
And what's interesting, who has never said you should be killed for what you've done? We can say this to our children, to parents, to anyone. It would be a lie to say, I've never had such a thing. I'd like to share an insight which I've got while listening to you. I have completely forgotten about this. When I was about 3 years old, my dad's sister passed away. She had 4 children. Well, the whole family surely united due to such an unexpected trouble. It was an accident in which the mother died, and the entire attention of my parents, grandmother, and grandfather was given to those children. It's understandable because they were still little. For about a year, they were staying with us, with my parents and grandparents. And only now I realized that this got imprinted on my memory. Back then, I was thinking over and over, if my mother died, it would be so good for me. Everyone would give me attention and gifts, would tell me how nice and wonderful I was, and would call me a poor thing. So basically, this is a selfish form of attracting attention to oneself in any way, even in such a terrible way. And as a matter of fact, up to this day, I didn't remember those moments at all, but when I was listening to you, I recalled them. And the most interesting thing is that I understand that it was the first entry of third forces, because already during the secondary surge, when I was 12, I remember very well that there was a similar period, and thank God, back then I shifted my attention to studies and to something else. So I somehow didn't bring it to action. Now, I'm even scared to think about this, even to analyze it. I remember myself sitting quietly at home, and my mom came in. Well, I saw her coming into the yard, and as soon as she entered, something awakened in me. Such anger towards this woman arose. And I did everything I could to offend her, to tell her unpleasant words, just to make her cry. And as soon as I made her cry, I felt such a glee. But who was exulting in me? There were no anticipations or any offenses for that. It was exactly an assertion of some kind of power, firstly over personality, over another personality, and merely manipulation. And these are kids. I'm not even talking about adults. Why? Because consciousness begins to strengthen its position.
I'd like to add more regarding the desire of children's or parents' death, of parents' death in particular. Tatiana has given a very good example of how the system works and how it manifests itself through these desires. But when we talk and listen to such examples, everyone has the following thoughts: oh no, I would never get to such a terrible point. And immediately the next thought comes: no, I've never had anything like that. I've just got this thought in myself while sitting here. Yet, didn't I have that? A year ago, my mother was seriously ill, had a post-stroke condition, and this implied a long and quite difficult care. For 8 months, I didn't have a single night without being alarmed. That is 2-3 calls per night, even if I managed not to be at the hospital. Such pictures were coming. Here I come to the hospital in the morning, and the manager or the attending physician comes out and informs me that this is it. It has happened. Mom has passed away, mom has died, and so on. But isn't that a wish for death? I'm tired, it's hard for me to handle this. Or I remember how in my childhood, when I allowed myself to snap at my father, he responded harshly to that. It wasn't even my early childhood. It was about 10 or 11 years old. And when my father shouted at me, this aggression of his frightened me very much. I was aware that we had unequal power, and I couldn't answer him back as harshly as he did. And at that moment, the following thoughts came to my mind: I hate you, I wish you die. And it happened more than once. So in actual fact, the programs of consciousness work in exactly the same way, and the point is only to see and to recognize them honestly. The same thing happens to everyone. There is no difference between people, whether it's a doctor, a fireman, or a shoemaker. The programs are equally destructive. And basically, when we say, no, I don't have this, it means our consciousness is telling us, you don't have this, I'm a good one. No, there is nothing good in it. It's an aggressor and a killer. There is nothing good, noble, worthy, understanding, or loving there. Nothing that would be associated with the word goodness.
Okay, I have a suggestion for everyone to proceed step by step. Let's talk about how a family is formed. Where does it all start from? What is the basis of relationships between people? What goals do they pursue when they begin, let's say, to show mutual interest? And what does it result in later on? We have already partially discussed the result of family formation and relations. Let's now watch a very interesting video. It will be played for us now. Let's watch it here with you, guys who are in the studio. As for those ones who are online, you will be able to see it on your screens.
There is true love. It is love in the spiritual world. It is love which is boundless or divine love. There are no gender differences in it. There is nothing in it. It is unity of people. Indeed, it's the unity of people in love. Why? Because in that world there is nothing except happiness and love. There are no negative emotions there. Well, it's for those who neither understand nor know. Why there are no negative emotions? Because they cannot exist there. There are no emotions there at all. There's happiness. There's love there. This is what that world is. Because it's the world of God. Whereas for people, consciousness always tries to copy. And so it inserts the concept of love into a framework of affection and responsibility. But again, what is behind this affection, responsibility and everything else, right? Manipulation, comfort, hormones and all the rest. While in actual fact, if we take and consider without bias any of these amorous states, we will come to an understanding of relationships between two people. And they don't have love as such in the higher understanding. They always watch over each other. They always try to manipulate one another. They always want something from each other. And what is there everywhere around? There's first and foremost egoism. And the other person is detached. And even when they say that we kind of feel each other and so on, eventually, of course, they feel. The system mixes up, consciousnesses of the couple start working almost like of a single person due to the long side-by-side stay. And they can even sit and be silent just like spiritual people. But they do feel each other, right? Well, it's possible to feel and no words are needed because there's a single language. But it's when people, so to say, have escaped from the embrace of consciousness a little bit. But consciousness copies just in the same way. When people have got used to each other to such an extent that they live in a single little world, especially old people, they start simultaneously inserting identical remarks. Why? Because consciousness is already almost one for the two. There are already two viewers with a little more actors on the stage. The system is simply saving on them. But may this be called love? No. Because this is always suffering, and here, note that again everywhere, in various novels, in movies, in all mass media, which force people to follow patterns and which encode consciousness, everywhere love is described as suffering, tragedy, something else, meaning it is filled with some worries and emotions. And now let's consider what do we know about emotions, about suffering and about all the rest. This is what forces us to invest attention. That is literally to pay for someone else's sins or to pay for the emptiness, simply put. Or using the language of economics, it's a bad business. So it turns out that people waste their spiritual powers on what is empty. Yet, can people coexist, say married couples, and how can it be otherwise? If we have such a lifestyle, if we have abandoned the communal order, there's already such an individual one. People like it, they live so. Well, for God's sake, let them live. If there's such an order, so let it be. Elementary respect and understanding of each other are already a basis of family happiness. But when in the family there's someone who is more or less spiritually free, he or she understands the other person. They understand what the septon field is telling their spouse right now and so on. But if they are imbued with respect and let's say they feel comfortable, again, comfortable and convenient with this person, they will never do anything bad to him or her and will help him or her. They are in three-dimensionality. Certain manipulation will take place anyway. It's impossible to force a person to follow the spiritual path or vice versa. This is his choice. However, joint habitation in three-dimensionality still leads to certain manipulation of each other, right? That is, someone must wash the floor, someone must go shopping and so on. Well, and here the tri-consciousness snaps into action. wanting, not wanting, bargaining, I will do that, you will do this, and the like. Elementary agreements with elements of manipulation. So one shouldn't make a tragedy out of it. But to call these things love, well, say it's sort of possible, but quotation marks should be used. What kind of love? Earthly love or spiritual love? But people often confuse it. That's the problem. However, if we talk about these things frankly and the way they really are, it can break the family order, because people will start copying without grasping the essence. And to understand all this, one should develop spiritually. Then everything is simplified. And people don't leave their families and they don't ruin them. But on the contrary, if someone really steps on the spiritual path, families get stronger. They cannot be ruined even if one person in the family has already stepped on the spiritual path and is engaged in spiritual development, while the other one is engaged in or is keen on some religion. Because any religion leads to God anyway. Well, if a person, let's say, is just keen on a religion, he performs right something else but continues to live the same way as an ordinary person lives, will it hinder them? No, it won't. A person who is following the spiritual path can enter any temple and visit any congregation. This doesn't hinder him in any way, because where God's name is mentioned, he should be comfortable, because at least they speak about his home. It's the same as if you emigrated or, well, were forced to stay for a while in another country. You recall your home, you feel good, and you know that this is your home. You know that you will return there sooner or later. If there is some gathering of people and they speak about your native city or your native village, well, of course it's interesting to be there. And why not? Why not communicate with these people, like-minded ones, right? Therefore, this is normal, this is natural. As a rule, only in rare cases when a person seeks love to one person, whereas mostly they, as there was an old movie, I am, she says, walking and men are falling and falling down like stocks. Well, it is consciousness telling, I'll become so beautiful just like that. I'm walking and men are falling and falling down. It is consciousness telling, well, this is consciousness. And regards men, it's vice versa, so that all women ride on them. Why does he need all women? Did he ask himself? What will he do with them? And here is precisely, all are mine, everybody loves me. Mind you, not I love. Nobody strives or asks, I love. Everybody strives to be loved by people, by God, but where are you? Where is your love? But until a person learns to love, meaning until a person himself becomes a source of these spiritual powers, the Alat powers, he will be going around in circles and will be listening to his actors. That is, the person will be deluding himself. Why does this happen? First of all, because in our childhood we are taught to do the right things, not to do something. Don't do this, it's not good. Don't do that, it's not good. And this you can do, it is good. This is what we are being taught. But we are not being taught what's behind that, which make us act one or another way. Even in childhood, to do what is not good. But what's behind it? It is precisely a thought that stands behind it, which we don't generate, we perceive it. And these thoughts make us act and behave badly towards others, even towards ourselves. They make us commit certain actions that often harm ourselves, and we pay for them ourselves thereafter. This is how our consciousness works. If, in childhood, we were taught to monitor our thoughts, to control them, not to accept what is bad, and if we were told how to do this, then in adult life we wouldn't make mistakes either. We wouldn't strive to search for those who would love us, but we would really love others, would love life, would love God, would love each other, and the world would be totally different. This is banal, this is simple, This is simple indeed, but in order for this simple to become a reality for all people, everyone who understands this, who cares, who really cares, should perform an enormous hard work. Religions have existed for thousands of years. For as many years, wars have existed. For as many years, crimes and wrongdoings have existed. And for as many years, the best people hurt their families and friends very often. Why does this happen? Because, pardon me, we as people are manipulated by those who since ancient times were called demons. Why demons? And what is a demon? And here, it would certainly be interesting to look back into antiquity when these expressions initially appeared and what they meant. A demon denotes an integral part of a human being. That is, a demon is the animal part of the human himself. If since childhood people understood that they had an angel and they had a demon and stood on the angel's side, if they were brought up with understanding that the demon would eventually lead them to the grave, it wouldn't give them life, wouldn't give them freedom. They would get rid of it already in childhood. In antiquity, there was an interesting expression. If we translate it, let's say, into our modern language, it would sound approximately like this. A free person remains free even in jail, while a slave of his consciousness remains a slave even on the freedom.
Let's continue our game. I would like to remind everyone that the topic of our today's game is the topic of family, the topic of relationships within the family, the topic of relationships between people. The video, which we have just seen, clearly shows what is really going on between people. There are a lot of important moments in what we have just watched. But I would like to point out that family and relationships today haven't been considered from the perspective of the hypothesis that underlines our game. Experts don't say that a person is dual. They don't say that there is a demon who implements his own scenario and who benefits from it. And today it is important for us to understand why this is beneficial for him, and most importantly, to understand why people act as he dictates. Why do they choose a demon scenario? And it has been very well and clearly stated. And Nada has also mentioned in her example today that everyone wants love. First of all, they want, and secondly, they dream of it. There is an answer to what has to be done with this. A person oneself should love, instead of requesting it from the system. Send me someone who will love me. I'm dreaming of this, it's so wonderful. This is actually a trap for natural human needs. But only if we consider a human as a dual being and understand what should prevail in him. So, guys, let's stop wanting, but begin to love, to produce what we need by ourselves. Now, it would be great to go back to the stages of how relationships start, how they proceed later on, how a family is formed, and what it eventually turns into.
If we consider the stages which people go through in their relationships when they start a family, we come to the conclusion that a human is indeed dual, and this initial impulse for love, mutual understanding, mutual respect, support and development is so pure, and it comes from the spiritual nature of a person. However, taking into account that there is the second part in a human being, meaning the animal nature, which is represented by consciousness, then everything is being quickly substituted. And if we take a look honestly, what is going on in society? In society, a family has actually turned into a ground for perfecting mutual manipulations between people, for endless wars and conflicts or the pettiest domestic issues. It has turned into a factory of egoists. If we look at the next generation, meaning at those children who are being brought up in such relationships and go out into society, they copy these manipulative patterns, these lies, this self-deception, and this manipulative manner of their parents who have actually raised them. And at the first stage, what people confuse with love is, as a matter of fact, passion. It is a vivid emotional state characterized by very strong emotions and a desire to possess. Moreover, already at this stage, pure biochemistry works, production of certain hormones, neuromediators. And even when brain scans were taken, reflecting what is happening in consciousness, such parallels were drawn that the brain of a person in love is similar to the brain of a drug addict in terms of activation of the relevant brain regions. A person's consciousness is narrowed on a partner, a man or a woman. All the thoughts are about him or her, and it's a total dependence on the partner's attitude towards you and the search of soulmates.
The love of one's life.
Other halves, the search of someone who will give me this love. It's not about giving love, not I generate love, not to learn to respect and understand another person, not to feel the relationship with the beloved one, with children, with this inner love, but to take it from somewhere, to find someone who will give me this attention and this love. Whose need is this? Who is the parasite? It's exactly the animal mind system and consciousness. It is parasitic and consumptive. It wants to get attention and emotions. And people who don't know what love is confuse it with this passion, this bright emotional state. That is, they have never felt it inside themselves. They haven't revealed the source of love in themselves, love for God. They don't have such an experience, so they confuse this passion with love. However, all this is programmed and ends up approximately in 9 months. It depends on one's fortune, because these are biological cycles. Otherwise, if it didn't take place, these two egoists wouldn't deal with each other at all. And accordingly, the system wouldn't have provided itself with an inflow of new energy sources, meaning it's an absolute biological program.
What does everything start from? What interests are actually there? And whose are they? Why does a human feel a need in relationships? Who pushes him to this? Tanya, thank you for explaining that a human feels a need in love. Yet nowadays, if we turn to people who are watching us and say, "You don't know what love is," every person or every other person can certainly tell us, "Sorry guys, I know what love is. I have been married 5 times." Figuratively speaking. Therefore, it is important to understand whose interests are actually at stake and whose programs are behind the situation that people start relationships exactly in such form as they exist in society today.
How do relationships actually arise? Tanya has already voiced this, and I absolutely agree that they begin based on the choice whom I can manipulate. So, who imprints this pattern in behavior, in the desire to create a family? Since childhood, such a self is being formed, a center, like a center of the universe with its significance. In the certain period of time, in order to maintain one's importance, high status and success in society, this program must be implemented. I'm a married woman, I have children. And for men, I'm a married man, I have a family. This is a confirmation of success, high status, and recognition in society. How does a woman choose a partner? The following phrases are often heard. Why have I picked this one and not the other? Well, I would be bored with that one, he's too kind, too good, and it's not interesting. Yet, who is not interested? In the video that we have watched, it has been shown so vividly and in such a contrast what true love is. It is a given feeling. I'm so full of love that I'm willing to share it. I have no consumer attitude towards another person. And what he feels, what matters to him, what makes his life is as important as my very self. There cannot be any demand or complaint. No conflict can arise from this feeling. But if a person has no knowledge of who he is, no understanding of what true love is, and he lives as consciousness, then whatever happens to him just happens. What is consciousness? We have already talked about it. What is its main goal? It's actually a killer inside of us who is taking our lives. And if I am my consciousness, can this killer bring me to love, to understanding, to respect, to true care for another person, for my children? It's impossible. And we see this. Statistics confirm it. As a matter of fact, all the statistics are the result of interaction of these egoists, but not people.
Moreover, statistics reflect these divorces in numbers. The majority of them, from 50 to 80%, I emphasize, in different countries depending on a year, happen after 3 years of living together. Civil marriages collapse just the same, after 3 to 5 years within this period. Let me draw your attention to the fact that oxytocin, the so-called loyalty neuromédiator, which actually provides this emotional affection between partners, ceases to act within this period, meaning its effect lasts for up to 3 years. This corresponds to the biological rhythms of conception, birth, and breastfeeding. Hence, it's a completely animal instinctive program. So, when chemistry stops working, why cannot people continue their relationships at least at some level of mutual respect and mutual understanding? Why does this immediately become such an unsolvable conflict that most people decide to terminate their relationships? It is totally clear that it's not the spiritual nature that motivates people to establish families nowadays. But what is behind is a completely destructive, manipulative, and parasitic animal nature, the system of the animal mind. Otherwise, we simply wouldn't have seen such results in society.
I'd like to give an example of one research. It was a research performed on wolves, little mouse-like rodents. There were two kinds of wolves, a common vole and a meadow vole. And the first ones had polygamous relations. They didn't care much about their offspring. That is, they had one kind of survival strategy. The second type of voles had a different strategy, so they cared much more about their offspring. Later on, when the experts started figuring out the difference, they found out that there is this hormone oxytocin, which has a wide range of effects, and which manifests this attitude of some voles to such monogamy. As far as I remember, those were the common voles. Yet, what's interesting is that when this gene of these voles was blocked, the gene which produced this hormone, they changed their lifestyle completely. The same happened to the meadow voles, which didn't have a strong manifestation of such behavior. When they got injections in this hormone, a desire and aspiration for polygamy emerged in them. So, in actual fact, it's the work of consciousness, which is behind all hormonal changes, according to our hypothesis. We do know from our hypothesis that all manifestations of any hormones at the physical level are merely a reflection of those processes which occur at the invisible level. Thus, consciousness gradually accustoms us. It's also written very interestingly that it slightly reduces anxiety, sort of it weakens memory, that is, reduces cognitive functions. This research shows only one side. However, according to my own experience in relationships, the struggle for domination and power started from the very beginning. Moreover, it revealed itself so subtly under the cover of mutual understanding. There was a following story.
I just met a girl online. We talked for a while, chatted with each other, and only after a few months, when we met in person, I began to tell her about my previous relationships. At first, I was doing that under such a plausible pretext, as if I wanted to tell her more about myself, being able to openly share some examples from my past life in order to achieve a certain mutual understanding. But in actual fact, when I recall this state, it was just wallowing in power, meaning it was such a sweet feeling from the fact that I was telling her everything. As I recall and analyze the situation now, I understand that it was kind of rough determination of boundaries, the boundaries of my power, of my domination, that I already had a great experience and was such a womanizer, so to say, knowledgeable in relationships. And it was because she had earlier said that she was a little bit shy and she hadn't had much experience in the relationships. Basically, it was exactly my story that provoked conflicts and jealousy later on, meaning it didn't lead to anything good, to any mutual understanding.
Thank you very much. I'd like to specify regarding your behavior. What was actually going on when you were presenting yourself as an experienced partner? You said it right. You were drawing boundaries. But what kind of boundaries? You know, we can say it was distribution of roles. I will be in charge. It's a concrete declaration by consciousness. I know better because I've seen more. Therefore, my dear, be ready to obey me. Have I got it right?
In fact, that's exactly what it was. Meaning, I highlighted that relationships are my territory. I know more about them, and I have more experience. Therefore, you should obey, and you will be another story, another collection of mine.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
To supplement what Sasha has said, he has actually mentioned a very important point. It's a deal from the very beginning. It's already manipulation between people, and fight for domination starts. A person in love wants to show himself from the best and the most beautiful side. That is, he actually wears masks and tries to impress the partner. And at the same time, he idealizes the partner, meaning he also sees only the best in the partner because I'm such a remarkable person and I can fall in love only with such a lovely person, and there is no critical attitude at all, so he doesn't notice any shortcomings or flaws. However, he doesn't see a real person either. This state of passion of falling in love is a complete self-deception. The system, the person's consciousness draws the person into a total illusion. That's why it is similar to a narcotic, an alcoholic intoxication. He is not aware. He himself doesn't comply with what he shows, and in his partner he sees not the real person, but an illusion, an image which he wishes to see. And in fact, this deal is based on the notion of whom I will be able to manipulate. The person's consciousness makes such a choice. It is not personality who chooses, but consciousness chooses a convenient object for manipulation without coming into contact with reality neither in oneself nor in another person. As we can see, two demons make a deal, two consciousnesses make a deal. And later on, of course, it has its consequences.
An absolutely different scenario is implemented.
And, pardon me, don't 50 to 80% of divorces prove that we act this way and not otherwise? And 1 billion children who are morally, physically or mentally abused in families are a half of children on our planet. All these data are understated. This is statistics. Excuse me, it's hard to argue with it. It tells us, still, it is understated 10 to 30 times.
We can argue with anything, but not with the numbers.
The thing is that when all people in a family are really under the dictatorship of their consciousness, it's very simple for the system to manipulate them. And then these relationships, these entanglements, parents, children, husband, wife, they're sort of long-term, and they're actually like a permanent feeder for the system. As a matter of fact, it's very simple to fall under the influence of this dictator, one's consciousness.
There is absolutely nothing difficult about this. I would also like to share a life situation from my personal experience. There was a period in my life when the relationship with my eldest son developed. There was a constant criticism from my side. There were blames, it came down to insults. In other words, my child had such an adolescence. And even though I also worked as a psychiatrist, was supposed to control my emotions somehow and to know all these things, I gave advice to others, but at the same time I couldn't help myself at home. What was happening? I explained it to myself this way. I want my child to grow up and become a good, hardworking and responsible person. Yet, as a matter of fact, it was self-deception. Because when I honestly wrote down my thoughts which governed me at those moments, and those conflicts, there was nothing but a desire for power and domination. If I recall, those were the thoughts like, how dare you talk to me this way? How dare you act like this, behave like this? You blemish me. You must do as I want, I know better. Everywhere there was this I, and for me, and nothing more, in fact. However, this self-deception that I know better and I want it the best way, this is what actually misleads. Sometimes it came to complete absurdity when some absolutely insignificant matter could drive me, let's say, into major anger and irritation. Just a trifle. The person put milk in a fridge in a different way, literally washed something wrongly, put his shoes in a wrong place. As they say in psychiatry, the emotional response is not adequate to the power of the irritant, by and large. I already saw that something was going on, but I was tired of myself, as I remember. I understood that I had to do something, that I had to change precisely myself. When I analyzed what was actually going on, the interesting thing which I noticed was that the greater my attempts, aspirations, and desire to change something were, the more intensive resistance I encountered. Meaning, some provocative situations emerged more often, and my reaction was even brighter than before. I got an impression that words came out before I actually realized anything. But anyway, at that time I didn't have an understanding like I have now. I didn't have the knowledge that came to me from the books by Anastasia Novych, the book *ALLATRA*, the programs with the participation of Igor Mikhailovich. I didn't have an understanding that a human is dual. They don't teach this at universities. But I observed this duality in myself, this really beastly animal component, when I behaved precisely this way. And there was a feeling that it's not mine. That feeling of pressure, those orders were like imposed. It even happened that I could hit the child. And at the moment when it was happening, there was such a feeling as if I was watching it from a side. You sort of understand what is going on, but it's impossible to stop. Of course, after such conflicts and scenes, there was complete devastation and a painful feeling of guilt. Because you sort of immediately switch over and wake up, and you understand what's going on.
I would also like to add, when you consult people, married couples, after 3 years of living together, it's obvious that only the hormone worked before. Because when they come for a consultation, after having lived together for such a period of time, it's a husband, a wife, a child, and a lot of complaints about each other. When you ask them, when you got married, what did you feel? They cannot even give a reason why they got married. They mention it was passion. Women say their goal was to have children. So, where is love here? And when we speak face to face, for example, with a husband or a wife, hopelessness in relationships is felt. They are lonely despite having a family. And they defend themselves by saying that they have to keep on living somehow. and they begin to adapt. Well, what else can we do? Let's just adapt. And do you know what's interesting? All this is hidden behind positive motives. It's my marital duty, I have to bring up the children. Yet, what is actually behind all this? Just inner emptiness in people. And the birth of children is also an interesting topic. It turns out that, well, I might be mistaken, it's just an analysis of my own experience. Quite often, people give birth to children in accordance with some program too. Because we people cannot explain why we have children. Because everyone does this, because it's the way things are done in society, meaning there is a social stereotype to have someone to rule over. Because later on, when married couples come for a consultation on parent-child relationships, they always ask the same question: how can I rule my child? There are almost no other questions. No one has come and asked, how can I learn to love my child? Thus, all of them asked about techniques, how to make a child obedient and advantageous. From the perspective of our hypothesis, I propose to discuss the situation because, in my opinion, parents seem to have a fear that there will be no one to remember them after their death, to go to a cemetery, bring flowers, and perform all those rites. Yet, if we consider this exactly based on our hypotheses, what happens to a person after his death? If a person hasn't developed spiritually, he becomes a subpersonality. And when we go to a cemetery and remember our relatives, it turns out that we give energy to those subpersonalities. And if our audience is interested, this entire process is described in the books by Anastasia Novych. For instance, I was reading the Primordial Electrophysics report, and although I'm not a physicist, I'm a psychologist, but it was clear to me that there is neither time nor distance in these processes of energy transmission. There is just an instantaneous transfer of energy. So, if we look from this point of view, it turns out that giving birth to children means a fear of not being fed after death. And generally speaking, in our society, commemoration of the deceased is considered to be a good behavior. These traditions are being instilled in all children. And for example, parents even come and complain, the child doesn't want to go to the cemetery with us. He doesn't want to learn to respect the elders, meaning these are allegedly negative qualities of the child. It seems to me that the issue of childbearing also remains open. Even when I've been asking myself this question, I have 2 children. Why did I give birth to my children? I simply cannot explain the reason why I had my first child. Everyone gave birth to children, and so did I. Am I worse than others? Well, it's supposed to be this way. So, there are no explanations at all, it's just a commonplace scheme. As for the second child, well, how will the first one be on his own? We need to. And there were the following thoughts: who will come to me afterwards? Who will remember me? Where did these thoughts come into my head from? Therefore, as a hypothesis, as an assumption, there is such a point of view.
Okay, I just wanted to add, since childhood we witness different kinds of family relationships, which become our role models. We see them throughout our lives, as we look at our friends and relatives. Then the movies, of course, have a huge impact, and all this is reflected in our actions, and we somehow repeat it all ourselves later on. We all know how people like to copy each other, thinking that certain family situations are right. The same thing as respecting adults, visiting graves, having children, building a house, getting a good job, and so on. In fact, I've been pondering upon this lately after watching the programs with Igor Mikhailovich. Why we are not able to love the way it should be? Why does everybody around do everything so stereotypically? Well, it's no surprise that most marriages, especially nowadays, are falling apart. I have been divorced twice, and looking back, I'm trying to understand why this happened.
Everything becomes clear now. Marriage for me was something different from what it was supposed to be. And it seems to me that this happens very often with many people precisely for this reason. Because we don't know what true love is. But thanks to the knowledge that is now being revealed, it has become clear how people should treat each other and what relationships should look like in general. And of course, it has to start with oneself.
I'd like to share a situation from my practice. There is a 40-year-old man. His mother is very seriously ill now. She has cancer, and she literally has a few months left to live. And I have known this man for a long time. He told me about his childhood, that he was the third child, and since his very birth, his mother was telling him, "Your father left the family because of you." That is, when she decided to keep the child, he had already had two elder brothers. His father decided to leave. He never wanted you, and he decided to leave. He was being told this literally since his childhood, as long as he remembers himself. Moreover, his mother, about 10 years ago, I also talked to her, told the same thing to all the relatives and friends. What a heroine she was! She had kept her child and lost her husband because of this. In actual fact, the situation was different. The father started a relationship with another woman, and the mother gave birth to this boy to keep him in the family. And it turned out that nobody in the family really wanted this child, meaning he has never felt love, as he says. Everyone knew that he was unwanted, and no one needed him. His mother and his brothers treated him accordingly, while his father never spoke with him at all, and they never met. If he took the two older brothers with him to the cinema or to a football game, the boy was just left home alone. And there was also a mental and physical abuse, even in a case with his mother when he was already a teenager. Once he came home late because he was looking for baby food for his nephew. When the baby was born, the guy was sent to a store. It was in the GDR before Christmas, but couldn't find it and spent 2 hours riding his bike from store to store. When he returned home, his mother just slapped his face so hard that he nearly fell down. In this man, there has been such hatred towards his mother since childhood. Now, after having no contact with her for almost 10 years, he found out that she was dying. Naturally, he had to take care of her and to settle her in a nursing home. And he told me the following: "You know, she still can do whatever she wants to us and will live for another couple of years." Well, he was implying that he wants her to die soon. I asked him, "Could you try to understand her somehow? Forgive her at least for the fact that she gave you life, even if she couldn't give you anything else." "No, I will never forgive her till I die." Lena has also been talking about feeding subpersonality. This is well described in the Elytra book. Actually, the following situation is being programmed in this case. When we recall our deceased, a transfer of vital energy from the living to the dead occurs beyond time and space. It happens not only when we were in good relationships with those people who died, our relatives, friends, parents, but also in such situations when children hate their parents. When the parents die, their children continue hating them for the rest of their lives. While hatred is a very strong negative emotion which feeds our consciousness, this particular subpersonality has already guaranteed itself that it will be fed on the vital energy of this man for the rest of his life. In hospitals, I have often witnessed situations when old people were admitted there and most of them were alone, dying from different diseases. There was even a woman who had 9 children, but no one ever came to visit her. They always had bad relationships and aversion. Even on their deathbed, they didn't want to call their children, ask for forgiveness, or simply talk to them in order to let go of this hatred. Although I talked to them, the answer was, "No, I'll never forgive them." This often happens in life, especially in the case of close relatives. Meaning, if a stranger has hurt someone's feelings, It's easier for a person to forgive him and to get over it. Yet if a close relative, a child or a spouse, has done something bad, the conflict lasts pretty much until the end of the person's life. Then this person turns into a sub-personality, which is burdened by all these negative emotions, and on top of that, until the end of his own life, for as long as he still has some vital force, he will feed the sub-personality of his adversary relative, for example, if the person's spouse or mother has died before him.
Not everyone knows what subpersonality means. As far as I understand, in psychiatry and psychology, there is also a concept of subpersonality. That's why those people who will be watching us for the first time can come to completely wrong conclusions. Everything that one Lena and the other Lena have just talked about is a demonstration of egoism in its pure form, isn't it?
Of course, we can say that having children is just another pattern of the system. First of all, to have someone to control. Secondly, it comes from subconscious fear to have someone to remember me, because it's a kind of anesthesia for subpersonality. Based on the definition of subpersonality given in the Allatra book, what is subpersonality? If a person as personality, as a part of his spiritual component, doesn't evolve into a new spiritual being by merging with his soul, then he merges with his consciousness after following its programs all his life. Thus, a new information structure is formed, which contains the entire accumulated negativity of these emotions, desires, sufferings, anger, and hatred. And with all this set, he becomes another layer around the soul, whereas the soul is being sent to reincarnation. And every time we recall someone dead, well, what is a recollection? It's just an information program filled with all the tragedy of these experiences associated with a loss, especially if it's a loss of a spouse of an old age, in which case laments will last till the end of one's life, or a loss of a little child, after which laments will last for years. Every time we recall the deceased, we have negative emotions. What are negative emotions? We already know that it's a part of our vital energy which is instantaneously passed to this subpersonality as an information program. That is, we are feeding a dead structure, thus the system is forming a feast for itself, so to say. If we recall all great leaders and rulers, there was a visualization of their portraits everywhere. There were portraits of Lenin in every office.
Monuments, statues.
Monuments, right, absolutely right. There were these portraits of leaders all over the country. What was it for? To make people keep recalling them. What kind of emotions associated with many rulers will be there? Very negative ones. In fact, it's a permanent feast for the system. Why are the photos of dead relatives being kept? Why are their belongings being gifted? I remember very well when my grandmother died, my aunt and uncle said, "Take something as a keepsake. Let this little plate which your grandmother used to have, or this little towel, remind you of your grandmother every time you use them." This is what I was told. Well, it sounds touching. Yes, my grandmother raised me, was looking after me, but in fact, behind all this, there is...
This is a certain form of fetishism, when even family jewels are being passed down. The value of this is completely different, to maintain contact. Lena has given a very significant example of how people in hospitals leave this world. In what condition? In fact, the harmfulness of the situation is that people don't know that if they leave this world having a grudge, anger, or hatred, then, as it has been said in many programs and written in many books, all of this intensifies there a great deal. And it is precisely this suffering that is described in all spiritual sources and all literature existing today. This is exactly the state of hell.
And it's interesting that people in such states, being close to death, on the contrary, seem to have even more active consciousness and more pronounced egoism. They have more complaints about relatives and even more negativity in their relationships with others, although logically, a person is on the verge, at the threshold. And if we are talking about the spiritual nature, if personality manifests itself, the individual, on the contrary, should make peace with everyone, inner peace, show more love, care, understanding, resolve conflicts that took place before. But in this case, everything is the opposite. And this paradox demonstrates how controlled we are when we live to the dictation of consciousness. These thoughts are extremely negative, as people themselves describe them. They bring all grievances to the surface, pick on trifles, and it even comes down to hatred. They live, they don't get sick while I'm so unhappy. It's just a bundle of negativity. This is what Lena and Diana have been talking about, that for subpersonalities, it doesn't matter what emotions they will be remembered with. If a relative is offended and cannot let go this grudge for years or for a lifetime, then yes, he will remember with negative emotions, constantly remember this person who passed away. It's just how much the system is interested in persons living this world in an extremely negative state, because this is a 100% subpersonality.
In the program Suicide After Death Fate, Igor Mikhailovich explains all this mechanism in a thorough, clear and simple manner as always.
Yes, absolutely right.
Subpersonalities cannot be good. Unfortunately, a subpersonality is the entire negativity, all the sufferings that you have. It has passed into a different state, there is no body. There's another form of existence, but all the sufferings, all the emotions and the entire negativity has remained and it prevails. And this is, pardon me, not the Groundhog Day. These are new ordeals and sufferings every day. But this is that very negativity which is devouring a person for centuries. This is true.
And this, by the way, is mentioned in all religions.
People knew about this, but they talked and told this, well, in such a, let's say, an attempt to explain the three-dimensionality that it does happen, they use allegories. And it's natural that...
Yes, well, let's say, here such an allegory is traced, an analogy as hot blazing fire.
Definitely.
And this is present in Islam, and this is present in Christianity as well.
It's present everywhere.
I'd like to continue on what Tatiana has said before, and in support of what Svetlana has said, that a person isn't willing to resolve any conflicts even at the end of his life. What does it actually mean for an ordinary person to resolve a conflict? Resolution of a conflict means to achieve your goal. That is, to resolve a conflict means to get an outcome which your consciousness actually wants. In most cases, either in our daily life or in any everyday situation with our relatives, none of us resolves conflicts by giving up our desires, our egoism, pridefulness, and our patterns imposed by our own thoughts. Every person wants his relatives to do what he wants, and then a conflict is considered to be finally resolved. We have already mentioned a lot of clinical cases when people consulted specialists, but I'd like to tell you a case from my personal life. I think that many similar cases can be shared by people who believe that they have well-to-do families, that they are fine and everything is successful. Because based on our hypothesis, what is considered to be a well-to-do family according to the standards of modern society and the will of the animal nature imposed on people's consciousness. It's where there is a husband, a wife, children, financial stability, and no divorce. Children have received a good education. Their parents have a good job. Everyone is happy. Everything is fine and successful. Everyone thinks that everything's all right. But what is going on in such families in everyday life? On the eve of this situation, I will give a short explanation. My dad had passed away, and for a long time I was in an extremely negative emotional state. At some point, I was away from my family in another country because I went away for my dad's funeral. My husband, children, and a woman who helped us with the chores stayed at home. Also, my mother-in-law came to visit us. The day before my departure, in a businesslike manner, I gave instructions to everyone on how to behave while I was away. So, you must feed the children this way. Pick them up from school that way. Put them to bed that way. You must call and report to me on how the day went by. So, don't forget this, don't forget that. I just overloaded them with tasks. Right before my departure, the woman who helps us with the chores, especially when I'm absent from home, she's responsible for most of my, so to say, requests, which are actually orders in disguise. She addressed me, "When you are away, my acquaintances will come for a vacation, and I'd like to meet with them and spend a day together." And I answered to her, "Sure, no problem. But please, get back by the time the kids come from school, because you have to feed them, and there is a list of things to do." And then I left. One evening, it was already quite late, I called my husband and asked, "So, how are you doing there? Are the kids already asleep?" He said, "Not yet, the kids are still awake, we are about to have dinner." I said, "How come you're about to have dinner only now? They need to go to school tomorrow, so it's long past their bedtime." At that moment, I already felt discontented. My instruction to keep track of the children's schedule was not followed. Then my husband said, "Our housekeeper has just arrived." And there was a second series of thoughts. How come she has just arrived? We agreed with her that she should come by the time the children get back from school. And at that moment, there were pictures in my head. The pictures were of this kind. It's dark, this woman is standing and cooking something, and my tired children are waiting for something to eat. I started having a go at my husband in an open way. "Come on, I cannot trust you with anything. I thought we have agreed." My husband said, "I don't know what you agreed on. Honestly, I wasn't aware. Yet, why have you got upset? Calm down, everything's fine. We are going to have a quick meal and go to bed." Instead of calming myself down, there was the second wave of thoughts, such as, "How is it possible? I cannot trust them. I left them. It's children's health. It's literally their destiny." Yet I actually understood that these thoughts originated from the fact that my instructions were not followed. It was exactly disobedience to my power. I gave some command as a general, and so my husband and the housekeeper had to execute this command. While in this case, it turned out that they had disobeyed. Yet my husband is a tough nut. He avoided the topic, and so I said, "Please give the phone to the housekeeper, I'll talk to her myself." And within those few seconds, when he was carrying the phone to her, I had a subtle understanding that if I stopped at that very moment, everything would be fine. However, very strong motivational thoughts sounded in my head. If you don't speak it out right now, you will create a precedent, and this will be constantly repeating to you in the future. In order to set the record straight, You must make the point clear. My husband gave her the phone. Here I must say and point out that I was already wearing a completely different mask. In the case of my husband, I really attacked him and was blunt. Whereas with our housekeeper, I wore a mask of a wise, calm snake that said, "Well, you know, we have agreed with you as it was very important. But you let me down." And these words, "you let me down," were said precisely to make her feel guilty. So just a few words were said, and she returned the phone to my husband. And then I continued attacking my husband. That is, I was blaming him and expressing my discontent. But my husband quickly stopped me. He said, "Listen, I'm not ready to continue this kind of talk. Go and calm down, and we'll talk tomorrow." "We are fine, don't worry. You have overreacted for no reason." And with that, we said goodbye. As soon as we said goodbye to each other, I felt a new wave of these thoughts growing in me. That is, just because he had interrupted the conversation, hadn't allowed me to provoke emotions in him and to set, say, a return fire in him, and he hadn't agreed with my opinion, a new stream of thoughts began. It was a series of thoughts associated with a housekeeper who prior to this accident was excellent, wonderful, kind, understanding, always helping, and then in 1 second she completely turned into my enemy, who let me down and didn't care about my children. When I got into such a difficult situation and was in the other part of the world. So how could I rely on her? And here thoughts came, I need to part with her. Again, why did these thoughts come? Firstly, it turns out to be a standard scenario that consciousness tries to separate people. And at that moment, a wonderful, loving, and understanding family was already divided into separate components. My husband was going through it in his own way. The housekeeper was going through it all in her own way. While I continued taking it very acutely. Later on, when I was analyzing all this in a calmer state, I realized that all those attacks had such intensity just because they were based on my pridefulness. And above all, on the exercise of power. After all, the director also doesn't direct in such a way that we try to exercise power over those who are impossible to control and are not our subordinates. We wouldn't try to exercise our power over them, while in this case there are clearly two leverages, the husband and the woman who simply depends on us financially. Accordingly, these are the two people over whom power can be easily exercised. When looking from this perspective further down, it was very interesting how the situation proceeded between me and my mother-in-law. For me, the situation was over. It remained in the past. I must say that consciousness drained me all my energy, because the next day I felt like the patients described by Diana and Tatiana. It was such a weakness, a complete lack of strength, inability and unwillingness to do anything. So it was really complete exhaustion and apathy. But eventually it was over. 10 days later, when I returned home, I had a conversation with my mother-in-law. And I observed the following. What kind of a mask did I wear when I was talking to my mother-in-law? In other words, I cannot apply the pattern of power to my mother-in-law. I don't have power over her. That's why I need to wear a mask of goodness, kindness, and love, so that she continues sympathizing with me. Thus, she didn't like the situation in general. She started the conversation from a point that she believed I treated her son badly, that I didn't respect his man's voice, and so on. I remember myself trying very hard to convince her that it wasn't so, that I respected my husband's voice, that I always listened to him, that his opinion was very important to me. And at that moment, I sincerely didn't understand how she could have thought differently. And of course, when you begin to analyze these facts and situations, you clearly understand what actually happens and how. The housekeeper overreacted and was extremely upset. She kept saying, "I'm not appreciated, I'm not respected." So the directing was just perfect. It turns out that I initiated this whole scenario, which affected every person. As it is written in the ALLATRA book, the system knows the weak points of every person's animal nature, because the system knows everything that has ever happened to a person and what he has ever invested his attention in. The most interesting thing is that I decided to talk to my husband and ask his opinion about his mother's words, that I didn't let him prove himself, and let's say the only thing I did was implementing my patterns of power. I was completely sure that my husband would definitely disagree with that. My husband's response was, "Listen, why do you think I've started off-road racing and diving in caves? For me, it's basically the only opportunity to express myself as a man in any way, and for my word to be taken into account." So it was actually a very edifying lesson. And there has come an understanding of how well the director acts. Where we get hooked, what happens when we start implementing these patterns, and how we let our animal nature take power over us. And all this is going on with different masks, with different voice intonations, with different words towards different people. Besides, we don't think it over. It gets activated automatically in us. Yet, if we don't track it and, moreover, if we open ourselves up to negativity, it enters into us, and such situations follow. But at the same time, it's a happy family, excellent relationships. The spouses love each other and everything is sort of wonderful.
Alina, thank you very much.
Alina has said that her father died, and for this reason she was in such an emotionally negative state for some time. And according to our hypothesis, we know that consciousness attacks all of us when it is overfed. That is, it already had the energy to develop this entire attack. And then, when it eats a person out, eats all his energy out, this causes a state of weakness, exhaustion, anxiety, and a lack of strength. The reason for all of this is that it simply wants to steal a lot from people around, getting as many people involved in this conflict as possible.
It's just that when you are listening to stories and telling your own story, any discussion seems to be a clash of demons. The only point is that demons don't really fight. It's us who are fighting with one another, while they are just playing a performance. We are fighting to the bone, and I've just recalled the words of Igor Mikhailovich from the program Climate, The Future is Now, when he says, "Satan has no arms and no legs. His arms and legs are your arms and legs. After all, he just whispers in the head and a person is doing. He whispers in the head and a person is screaming. He prompts in the head and a person is killing. Satan hasn't killed anyone. It's you who kill each other, my friends, and this is true. But we should also remember that God has no other hands than ours either. That's why we have to make a choice all the time. And in order to understand what we are choosing between, it's exactly what we have seen in the fragment, when children just get an assessment of what they're doing. This is good or bad, yes or no, right or wrong. Yet, what is behind this? And the most terrible thing is that the system has brought us up like this. We have agreed with this, agreed with the fact that we are this consciousness. And then, from the very childhood, we deprive our child of this right of choice, of the understanding of what to choose between. We're not showing him our own example.
If a person understands who he is and why he's here, and understands that these 80% or even more of thoughts in his head are negative and not for him, and he doesn't need them, if he rejects those illusionary fetters that Satan has imposed on him, because in fact it's Satan who has imposed them on him. Satan has no arms, no legs. His arms and legs are your arms and legs. After all, he just whispers in the head and a person is doing. He whispers in the head and the person is screaming. He prompts in the head and the person is killing. Isn't that so? It is. Satan hasn't killed anyone. It's you who kill each other, my friend. And this is true. If a person has realized this and simply stopped submitting to all this negativity, and he puts his attention as the main resource in what is good and positive, in love precisely, in the spiritual direction, then everything will change. And then freedom might come, in fact. And after freedom, life will come.
I will also comment on a few points from Alina's story, plus on what Sveta has said before. Alina, you've said that you had a moment of choice whether to stop the development of the situation or not, while your husband was handing over the phone to the woman who helps you around the house. And you've said a phrase that came from your consciousness, which provoked this conflict and its development. If you don't talk to her now, this will be repeated. It's important to understand what this is. Disobedience. Disobedience to my selfishness. If I don't punish them now, they will get out of my power. And this should be understood.
It is surely execution of the order. Non-execution of the order must be stopped, of course.
Here we go. And it is also important for us to voice these things so that we understand and sort them out, and so that the audience understands them as well. In Svetlana's example, there have been very good points. You put milk in the wrong place. You made your bed in the wrong way. You spoke to me in a wrong tone. What does this indicate? Again, this indicates the same power and domination of consciousness. And what about these quick mood swings? A husband or a mom comes home from work in a good mood. They are smiling, everything is fine. A thought comes. The children are so and so. They haven't put away their toys or books. Or, oh my goodness, my wife gave me a cold soup. The sour cream is on the left side, not on the right one. So it starts spinning up. All the negativity is coming out. Everything that was once speculated about is coming out. And what does all of this develop into? Into a conflict, slamming doors, breaking dishes, shouting. Under whose guidance? And who leads to all of this? A typical situation. What is typical about this situation? What is really typical in this situation is the manifestation of consciousness and demonstration of power and desire to dominate, to subdue others. And this typicality is inherent in every person. If consciousness tells you that you are an exception, that you don't have such a thing. Congratulations, you're the same as everyone else.
I would also like to add to everything that has been said, what is actually the most important thing? How can you not listen to these orders in your head? The most important thing is to begin with honesty. First of all, with being honest with yourself. We've already given many examples today of how people manipulate each other and families when they listen to their consciousness. However, not only do they manipulate, they also lie to each other. And we lie not just openly, but in a hidden way too. And not just to each other, but to ourselves as well. Even when we have just fallen in love with someone, I would disagree that an individual doesn't see the shortcomings of another person, doesn't see any of his behavioral patterns. As a matter of fact, he sees and understands everything. It's just that at this stage, it would be very disadvantageous for him to notice that because this pattern of behavior has already started. And a person needs to implement it, meaning to marry this person, to have children, and later on it becomes possible to claim his rights at full power. When I've got to know the knowledge, I have realized that I saw all the flaws of my husband, all the things I didn't like about him, but I preferred not to notice them. I put rose-colored glasses on myself, so to say. But later on, when this stage, 3 years passed, when our child was born, that is the goal of my consciousness. The main goal of this marriage was accomplished. That's when I certainly began to express to my husband everything I had not agreed with before. And of course, my husband was amazed. You seem to be okay with everything, so why are you complaining now? But in fact, this is how consciousness works. Consciousness offers something to a person, and the person listens, follows its lead, and implements it. Therefore, the most important thing here is to be honest with ourselves, because for as long as we lie to ourselves, nothing will change.
Natasha has returned to a very good topic. It is essential to understand the basics here. You know, there is a very famous saying, or an axiom. When entering into marriage, a wife believes that she will be able to change her husband, while the husband believes that the woman won't change and will remain the same as she was when he fell in love with her. But at the same time, consciousness assesses the situation and gives a task. I will change him or her. Consciousness evaluates how easily it will be able to manipulate one or another person.
I'd like to share the following example. You are saying it's none of my concern. For instance, when we were watching the interviews with serial killers, consciousness said, well, you see, you are so spiritual, you don't get those terrible thoughts, where serial killers are and where you are. I've been keeping a diary and watching over my consciousness for quite a long time, and I've noticed such a parallel. There are 2 cases in my family life when such thoughts come. For instance, there is a situation when consciousness doesn't like what the husband is doing. And of course, the pattern of power is turned on, and obsessive thoughts from consciousness are coming in the form of an order. Say it, say it. I hear this, I even write it down in my diary, and I sort of decide that I won't say it or I won't do it. Yet, the next moment, I turn around and say what I've just written down that I wouldn't say. There is also another interesting point. What those killers said is that, in the beginning, they felt pressure. And after that, when they had already done it, they felt relieved. And I also noticed that when it had imposed, say it, say it, say it, on me, and I wrote it down and decided not to do it, but I still felt the pressure. And when it was said so, there was a feeling of satisfaction. Even something like this. Cool. But here is what I noticed during one situation. Consciousness wanted me to provoke a quarrel. I kind of calmed down and decided that I wouldn't say it. Everything was fine, but then there was a click, and my mouth said these words. And then I felt so happy. Wow, now the scandal had begun. When I noticed that, I drew a distinct parallel. Of course, you realize that no one is safe from it, and it is everyone's concern, and it's very important to really learn observing instead of fighting with yourself, and to intensify this power of love.
Today we have considered many situations concerning human life and family relations. I have noticed that the starting point of all conflicts is when a person agrees with an offer of consciousness. A question arises: what should a person do in order to avoid agreeing with consciousness, being influenced by consciousness, and to choose a different reaction?
The only effective answer regarding what to do in order not to follow the orders of consciousness is given in the books by Anastasia Novych, in particular *ALLATRA, Consciousness and Personality, in the same name video, and in many other programs with Igor Mikhailovich Danilov. In short, first and foremost, one needs to observe these thoughts, not just to live as dictated by these thoughts, considering them to be oneself, but to keep observing them. In order to observe them, there must be an observer, meaning a person manifests himself as personality, and then he is able not to accept them. He can be critical about them, and he can pay attention to other things, good and constructive ones. In the program Freedom from Beasts Dictatorship Within Yourself, Igor Mikhailovich describes this first step and how to make it. And later on, when a person is already able to observe the work of consciousness separately from himself, he is learning to be his real self. He is learning to love, to open the inner source of true love inside him.
My friends, in order to gain life, one needs to work. One needs to really practice, to stop being lazy, to stop lying to oneself, to start acting. Again, to start practicing. Not to engage in listening to the devil and dancing to his tune, but actually start practicing and studying consciousness. What is the first thing everything begins with? Yes, it's clear, with being honest with oneself, but also skills, ordinary skills. It means taking a closer look at your thoughts, the one which you don't order, from the standpoint of an observer, even from the standpoint of primary consciousness. How many thoughts and what chaos is in your head, and who dictates to you, and who forces you to do what? To learn simply to remove doubts regarding everything that concerns the spiritual world. Where is it coming from in such negativity, in such quantity? Why is it doing that? Just to ask yourself a question, to make your consciousness answer the question. Well, isn't that so? If it gets you outraged and anger boils up in a person, well, towards a friend or something else, envy. Well, all this negative. Why do you need this, and why do you allow this? Why does it give it to you? And when you realize that it's consciousness giving this to you, and this is not yours, it's already a part of the victory. Well, then there is more, and to develop this way. And that's when life is actually gained.
I'd like to share my life experience. We have two children. One morning they were getting ready to leave for school. And in order to not disturb the children so that they could brush their teeth faster, I was lying in bed and reading the book *ALLATRA. And I was in a very good mood. Everything was fine, I had such a great understanding of things. But the next moment the following happened. The children were in a hurry to school. One of them got stuck around and I heard my wife saying, hurry up, how can it take you so long? You are like a sleepy fly. Look, he's faster than you are. And I already got distracted from what I was reading and started to hear thoughts. How long will this be going on? Every day, I explain, every day. And I started winding myself up in my thoughts. Stopped reading. Burst into emotion, ran to the bathroom, grabbed the kids by the collars, and said, for how long can I teach you? How many times can I explain it to you? I've understood that if you had love inside, you would have never started all this with each other. In the meantime, I was shaking them like this. Then I calmed down, stepped aside, and began to understand what I had done. But at that moment, it was kind of embarrassing to admit it in front of them. When one kid had already left for school, I came up to the other one, apologized, and said that I had followed consciousness and hadn't caught the moment when I started getting irritated. I just heard that I had to punish you. I'm telling you about love. But at that moment, I showed an example of how a person should not act.
I'm listening to people's experiences, and it's clear that the only enemy in the family is the system. I mean, it's like we come to psychologists with questions, fight with one another, try to re-educate someone, to bring up children, and it doesn't work. And we are solving these external problems, which were mentioned at the beginning. But in fact, our enemy is invisible. It is consciousness. It's the system. When you have knowledge of the dual nature of a human, which is given in the ALLATRA book, it's very easy to understand. It's easy to see. And as it has been said, working on yourself in the simplest domestic situations, you see how certain orders are being dictated to you in your head. That's what has already been discussed today. And I realize that in order to make everything all right, well, generally speaking, I've got such an understanding that a family is a convenient and fast way of causing clashes between people and taking more attention from them. Because we see each other every day, and every day we can make up some dissatisfaction with each other, and it is based on the desire of power of each other. It's very well seen when I've really started to observe what's going on in my head, not in the other person, but exactly in myself. There are a lot of cases to cite, but what I have understood for myself is that this hypothesis, which we refer to, is the basis. This knowledge is the foundation of a happy family, a happy person, and happy society, because it all begins with the fact that one person can change himself or herself. And this knowledge indeed provides solutions, understanding, and tools of how to do it.
Today we have considered many examples of conflicts in families, power, manipulation, and a considerable outburst of emotions. And we're asking the question, who is behind all this? You know, while counseling and analyzing such conflict situations in the family, I've noticed that when people are emotional, they often say, "I got furious like a demon." Such expression emerged, "Now I'll act like a demon." And it seems to me that the one who is behind this is just telling us straight, "I am a demon." I mean, the same word is used, and it makes sense. If we consider that consciousness is not ours and thoughts come to us, then the one who is behind this comes to us as well.
Today, we have outlined the evident mechanisms of the work of consciousness inside of each person and how it manifests itself in the family. You know, while preparing for this game, we had a lot of conversations. Tanya, you found a definition of the word family, surname in French. Can you voice it now?
The word familia doesn't originally mean the ideal of a modern Philistine, which is a combination of sentimentality and domestic squabbles. The Romans initially didn't even apply it to spouses or children, but only to slaves. Familias means domestic slave, while familia is a group of slaves belonging to one person. And also at the time of ga familia, there is a patrimonium, meaning inheritance. It was passed on by a will. This expression was made up by the Romans to denote a new social organism, the head of which was the master of his wife, children, and a certain number of slaves. He had salarian, paternal authority, the right to control life and death of all his subordinates.
Thank you.
That's the definition. It's just that by the word familia, in nearly all Latin languages, French, Spanish, Italian, a family is called.
As for the definition of the family in Latin, we all know who introduced Latin, why it was introduced, and who used it for communication. Based on what we have discussed today, it becomes clear and obvious who is whose slave and who is the master. In the video that we have just watched, it is clearly said that both in the knowledge and in the hypothesis which we use in the game, a family is a spiritual unity, and since a family is a unit of society, and what happens in society is a reflection of what happens in the family, we should make a decision for ourselves as to which society we want to live in. And on this basis, we need to decide, first of all, what we should be like, and what kind of example we set for our children and our loved ones by our actions and behavior. And if we change ourselves, the family will change. And after change in the small unit, we will be able to talk about changes in society, since any big journey begins with a little step. Thank you very much for this wonderful game, and see you again!